Chapter 2687. This was the first time she saw someone rushing to be a slave. Wei Wei Bai expressed that the service was waived. As long as the mission was completed, she would be able to leave with her hands and feet intact. She looked bitterly at the small mission at hand. The foot-washing water had been completed earlier. Exposing her identity, exposing her wolf's ambition, and not loving Yu Xiaoyun. These 3 small missions were completed at the same time. There were about 8 missions left. One was that she had to control part of the Bai family's power within 3 months and make Yu Xiaoyun's transformation fail. This mission was the biggest. The other 7, 1. What the hell was she asking him to feed her? Did she really have to keep a slave just to serve her tea? 2. Ask him to massage her shoulders. 3. Take the opportunity to whip him. 4. Say that he was a dog and that he would be her dog for life. 5. Ask him to work for her. What kind of work? Does helping her bathe count? 6. Ask him to be her chair. The last one was to make Yu Xiaoyun admit that she was better than him. At the end of the side mission, there was a suggestion on the list: all missions are to make the host strive to be the master, get rid of the inherent image of a little white flower, and let the male lead know who is the master. Wei Wei Bai said that she deleted all the suggestions and added 100 curses from friendly countries. After staying in the bathroom for too long, her skin was wrinkled. She walked out in her tight-fitting pajamas with a bitter look on her face. Sure enough, she saw Yu Xiaoyun, who had been kicked out of the bathroom, sitting cross-legged on the bed with a document between his legs. There were messy folders around the bed. She had just taken them out of the safe in the study. The man lowered his head and looked at them seriously. The beautiful lines of his face were exceptionally clear and beautiful, like the kind of man in all women's first love dreams. Even if he was about to be 30, his face was still so delicate and flawless. Bai Weiwei helplessly rubbed her face. She was sure that she wanted to whip this kind of man, make him her chair, dog, make him her cow, horse, slave, servant. Just thinking about it made her a little excited. What was going on? She couldn't be hypnotized by the little watch. Pretending to be pitiful and lying down to win was a beautiful strategy. Once she took the route of the female lead, she would be as tired as a dog. Yu Xiaoyun had already asked the bodyguards to leave. In this big empty house, only Yu Xiaoyun and her were left. He wondered when she would contact her accomplice. After all, it was not a good idea to imprison someone like him without having more of their own people to watch over him. Yu Xiaoyun looked up absent-mindedly and saw Wei Wei Bai standing by the bed. Her pitiful and hateful face was damp from her shower and tender. He pursed his lips, but the strange heat in his body did not leave. However, because the flowers had been cleaned up, the fragrance of the flowers had also disappeared. His condition did not continue to be serious, and his intense desires had also faded a little. His fingers pinched the document, and he slowly exhaled a warm breath. Everything you want is here, but some of the documents are not at home. It will take some time to transfer the property. It wasn't something that could be done with just a signature. For some of them, it was useless even if he was the only one signing. They required the signatures of many people, and they could only be successfully transferred through various means. There were many things going on inside. Yu Xiaoyun felt that she wouldn't be able to handle it. Looking at the innocent and helpless Wei Wei Bai, he really felt that his thoughts were laughable. At this time, he was still worried about whether she could handle it or not. Yu Xiaoyun felt that he was ridiculous. The property that he had accumulated for more than 10 years, and a group of elites who had been won over by him to their deaths. Fast. The download address is at https://www.sashu.com fast. Chapter 2688. These were all his foundation. However, he only wanted to find out who was behind her and see who her confidant, counselor, and even commander was. For the first time, Yu Xiaoyun felt darkness rolling in his heart. It was all absurd jealousy that was smaller than the eye of a needle. Wei Wei Bai glanced at him coldly. "Oh, I know. Why aren't you signing?" Yu Xiaoyun wanted to teach her a few words, but he was stopped. However, he saw that Wei Wei Bai's hand, which was hidden behind her, seemed to be trembling. Yu Xiaoyun lowered his eyes and signed without hesitation with the pen in his hand. The flamboyant name was so smooth that there was no trace of hesitation. It was as if these industries weren't his. Then, he handed the document to Wei Wei Bai. "Take a look." Wei Wei Bai took it and didn't wait to look. Yu Xiaoyun's attitude was natural and calm as he went to get the other documents and continued to sign. Wei Wei Bai almost suspected that Yu Xiaoyun was possessed. His favorability was not low. His attitude didn't seem to hate her. There wasn't a trace of anger from being robbed of power. This wasn't a reaction that a normal person would have. Even a pervert wouldn't have such a reaction. Or was he a vegetarian who had eaten for a long time and had a Buddhist heart? She held the document and watched as the progress of the small task of seizing power in 3 months jumped crazily. In the end, Yu Xiaoyun calmly closed the lid of the pen and stuffed a stack of documents into her hands. "Take a look at it so that I won't lie to you." Wei Wei Bai held the heavy document and saw that the small task had jumped to 80%. Although she didn't get all the industries, the part of Yu Xiaoyun's signature was enough for her to turn the tides. Therefore, the small task showed that she had succeeded in seizing power. The remaining 20% of the progress would take 3 months. As long as the power of the industries in her hands wasn't taken away within 3 months, she would have completed the biggest and most difficult task on the list. The rest of the tasks were trivial matters like whipping a whip and pouring tea for him. Wei Wei Bai held the document and turned to leave. Yu Xiaoyun looked up at her back as she walked with difficulty. The heat in the man's eyes was still there. He tugged at his collar. The heat was unbearable. She was responsible for drugging him with this dirty trick. But he was not responsible for giving him the antidote. Could it be that he wasn't even a man in her eyes? Therefore, she had no intention of helping him at all. Or was he so disgusted that he didn't even give him a woman as a reward for seizing power? Yu Xiaoyun thought of this method. He was so disgusted that his stomach started to churn. He didn't force himself to guess Wei Wei Bai's thoughts. After all, she really wanted to get him another woman. He would probably hate her to death. Thinking of this, Yu Xiaoyun got up and went to the bathroom to take a cold shower. At least today, he couldn't bear to touch her. After all, he was impulsive when he was angry. With her small body, which had not been healthy for a long time, if he couldn't hold her down, he would destroy her body. When Yu Xiaoyun was pouring water on her, he suddenly felt that he really spoiled her too much. He spoiled her into an ingrate and even gave her all kinds of excuses. He just didn't know how long he could tolerate her this time. Perhaps one day, he couldn't bear it anymore and would tear her apart like he tore apart the Bai family. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 65. Yu Xiaoyun's favorability dropped. Wei Wei Bai was not surprised. She stuffed the document into the system's hands to determine the amount of the industry and the parts that could be used. The favorability had only dropped now. Yu Xiaoyun's emotions were slow enough. Only then did he feel the pain and anger of betrayal. Read the full article at https://www.sashu.com. Read the at https://m.sashu.com, Chapter 2689. Wei Wei Bai had analyzed people like Yu Xiaoyun. They were good at enduring and were very scheming. As a result, his reaction to any betrayal or setback would be particularly slow. Because to him, anger and disgust were not as good as calmness. Therefore, as long as she controlled the degree of courting death, after solving the side quest within 3 months, this man's favorability should still be quite high. After all, if he really hated her, it would take a while for him to slowly hate her. His favorability would not fall too badly. Wei Wei Bai expressed that everything was under reasonable speculation. She pretended that she had hidden the documents and entered the room again. Because she wanted Yu Xiaoyun to be a slave, she wanted him to be mentally prepared. She threw a quilt on the ground. From today onwards, you will lie on the ground and sleep. Don't forget your identity. The Bai family provides you with food and drink. You don't go to school to be above others, but to serve others. Yu Xiaoyun, who had just come out of the bathroom, had a head full of wet hair. His eyelashes had water droplets. When he heard this, he trembled and the water stains fell from the corner of his eyes to his chin. Yu Xiaoyun felt that he shouldn't have taken cold water. He raised his head. His gentle eyes carried a hint of coldness. Okay. It was such a simple sentence. But she could see that he was about to explode with coldness. Wei Wei Bai kicked the quilt. Go to sleep. Yu Xiaoyun, she was taking advantage of him. He stared at her for a while and saw that she was still glaring at him with bared fangs and brandished claws. It was as if she wanted to compare the size of his eyes. Seriously, she was much cuter when she was mentally retarded. But now, she was actually cute. It was just infuriating. Yu Xiaoyun threw the quilt expressionlessly. Then, he hugged the quilt and lay on the carpet. He covered his head with the quilt and ignored her. Tonight, his tolerance for her had reached its limit. If she continued to disturb him, he would really be angry. Wei Wei Bai saw that Yu Xiaoyun covered his head and deliberately fell asleep with his back facing her. His entire body language exuded the aura of being angry, but I won't say it. Wei Wei Bai looked exhausted. She reached out and rubbed the bridge of her nose. She was also suffering. She tossed and turned, she made a fuss and made a fuss, who was willing? She was also a victim. Wei Wei Bai lay down and stared at the ceiling. She was thinking about how to cut the branch into 8 pieces. He finally managed to endure for half an hour. She asked the system, is he asleep? The system replied, no. Wei Wei Bai, that's good. She was afraid that she would lose all her favorability points, so it was better for her to work hard to increase her favorability points by 1 or 2 points outside of the side quest. Yu Xiaoyun did not fall asleep. Instead, he resisted the urge to go to bed and bully her. He closed his eyes and breathed steadily. However, his muscles were a little stiff. Suddenly, he heard Wei Wei Bai getting off the bed. Was she going out to find someone? Yu Xiaoyun opened his eyes, which were clear and bright. However, Yu Xiaoyun felt it. She reached out and gently stroked his hair. Her slender and slightly cold fingertips ran through his black hair that had fallen outside the blanket. That little bit of coolness, the feeling of touching his scalp, was numb but also warm. Yu Xiaoyun did not move and let her do as she pleased. This gentle action lasted for a few minutes. When he moved, the girl behind him was like a frightened little animal. Her fingers quickly moved away. Yu Xiaoyun did not move again, as if he was really asleep. Wei Wei Bai let out a sigh of relief. She carefully left him and muttered in dissatisfaction, there will be a day when you will fall into my hands. Don't even think about running away next time. This sentence was said in an unusually childish manner. There was no mature sense of threat at all. After a long time, Yu Xiaoyun sat up straight. He stared at Wei Wei Bai, who was sleeping under the blanket with an expressionless face. He stared for a long time. Then he lay back down expressionlessly. Don't even think about running away. Those who did not know would think that she loved him so much that she wanted to imprison him. Yu Xiaoyun could not help but curve his lips. The coldness that spread throughout his body dissipated. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 70. Chapter 2690. When Yu Xiaoyun woke up, his eyes were extremely drowsy, but in the blink of an eye, he immediately woke up. He sat up with a head full of hair. Then, in the blink of an eye, he saw Wei Wei by pouting and sleeping like a little pig. It was only 6:00. Yu Xiaoyun had always woken up early because of his biological clock. Even if he didn't sleep much last night, he would still wake up at this time as usual. However, Wei Wei Bai couldn't do anything about it. She was used to being lazy. She went to bed early and woke up late. During this period of time, she had been spoiled by him until she was delicate and lazy. Not to mention the eldest miss. She was his little ancestor. The servants were rougher than her and chased away with a knife, not leaving many who could be used. There should have been servants waiting outside the door to serve them. In the end, when he woke up, he was faced with the empty love garden and the entire Bai family mansion that had changed its surname. This delicate little ancestor probably didn't know that if there was no one in such a spacious place, in less than a month, it would become a ghost town. Places where no one lived deteriorated very quickly. Moreover, no one was guarding 3 meals a day in the morning and at night. That was a lot of trouble. Even the leaves outside had fallen. If they were not swept for a day, the road and the courtyard would soon disappear. A bunch of questions flashed through Yu Xiaoyun's mind. He suddenly reached out and grabbed his hair in frustration. He was really sick. He wasn't thinking about his career now. He was thinking about where his subordinates were hidden and whether any of them had died. There was also the consequences of the failed transformation of the Hainan Airlines project. He was thinking about what would happen if she woke up with no food to eat, no flowers to reward, and no one to serve her. Yu Xiaoyun felt that he really loved her to the bone. It was simply, forget it. Yu Xiaoyun got up barefoot and walked to the bedside. He reached out and touched her long hair. Her fingertips were a little cold. Her skin was also a little cold. The blanket was too thin, and she forgot to turn on the air conditioner last night. After all, it was already the end of summer. It was almost the beginning of autumn. She wouldn't worry about her body. She might not even know how to put on clothes when she was cold. She had developed a vicious and ingrate personality. Her brain was still that of a few years old. Yu Xiaoyun saw that there were drool marks on her pink face. In the end, he heaved a heavy sigh and decided to forget it. If he was led astray, then he would teach him well. It wasn't as if they hadn't experienced setbacks before, so the maritime aviation project was suspended first. She would first grind her temper while he still liked her. What if he didn't like her in the future? He might kill her, and then she wouldn't be able to learn even if she wanted to. Yu Xiaoyun thought coldly and warmly. Bai Weiwei felt that as she slept, she felt like a hungry wolf was staring at her. She silently shrank back. It must be that hungry wolf, Yu Xiaoyun. Let him glare at her. She wouldn't hand her over to him without at least 3 months. He woke up naturally. Wei Wei Bai crawled out of the quilt with messy hair and found that her quilt was much thicker. Because there was an extra blanket, it was Yu Xiaoyun who slept on the floor last night. She scratched her head speechlessly and then rubbed her stomach. She was hungry. The servants were all chased away. There was no other way. If he didn't chase him away, how could he make Yu Xiaoyun work? With Yu Xiaoyun's noble appearance, it was impossible to provoke him at all. The people around him would automatically serve him. He was this kind of person. Even the chopsticks and bowls had to be placed properly for him to eat. He probably wouldn't touch rice, oil, and salt in his life. She had already planned to chase the servants away. Then she would force Yu Xiaoyun to do work. She would let him do things like serving tea and feeding when there were no servants around, // Chapter 2691. This way, she could complete a mission. Then, using the excuse that he didn't do a good job, she could find an excuse to whip him. This way, she could complete another mission. She guessed that he was angry at that time and glared at her. She angrily called him a dog and a dog for life. Okay, another mission was completed. As for work, the little horse said that it was work, so she put this aside first. Being a chair and saying that she was awesome. She hadn't thought about this yet. Wei Wei Bai applauded herself expressionlessly. Oh, she was still very awesome. She had just woken up and she had already solved more than half of the side missions. If the side missions wanted to defeat her, it would take 10,000 years of effort. Wei Wei Bai had just finished applauding when she saw a slender figure enter the door. A beautiful shadow was pulled in from the morning light. Yu Xiaoyun walked in with a plate of food. There were a few side dishes and porridge on it. He had already tidied himself up. He was wearing a set of silk clothes and cloth shoes, looking very refreshed. Seeing that Bai Weiwei still hadn't woken up, he said very indifferently, "Go wash up, then eat." Before Weiwei Bai could flare up and ask him to cook, he had already finished automatically. Weiwei Bai's mouth twitched. Did this count as completing the side mission? After thinking about it, Weiwei Bai still said indifferently to be on the safe side, "Yes, well done. Prepare like this in the future." Yu Xiaoyun, who had just put down the plate of food and was filling the porridge, paused. Then, he looked up with gentle eyes and a faint smile. "Okay, as long as you like it." Weiwei Bai felt that this strange look was very compatible with his resentment of being betrayed. So she went to wash up happily. Yu Xiaoyun saw her heartless look and couldn't tell that she could endure for so long. Just to betray him. If she could be 100% vicious and not give him any reason to be sentimental, he wouldn't be so conflicted about her. Weiwei Bai washed up and saw that Yu Xiaoyun was already eating porridge by himself. He didn't wait for her at all. He used to wait for her to eat with him. Weiwei Bai didn't care about this at all, but she couldn't lose the main storyline for the sake of a side quest. So she stood there, rubbed her eyes, and stared blankly at Yu Xiaoyun, who was eating porridge. Yu Xiaoyun originally wanted to eat first and then contact a few of his subordinates who were not affected by the bomb. However, he felt a resentful gaze land on him. He stared blankly for a moment before turning to look at her. He saw Weiwei Bai standing not too far away. Her hands were tugging at her clothes, and her long hair was draped over her shoulders. She looked like an immature child. Both of her eyes were red. He seemed to have been greatly wronged. She seemed to be reprimanding him for eating first and not calling her. For a moment, the porridge in Yu Xiaoyun's mouth became even more tasteless. After a moment of silence, he helplessly put down his chopsticks and said, "Why aren't you eating yet?" When Weiwei Bai heard this, she immediately ran over and sat opposite him. Just as she was about to pick up the bowl, she thought of something and slammed the bowl on the table. "Why are they all vegetarian? Are you deliberately trying to starve me to death, Yu Xiaoyun?" Yu Xiaoyun had just picked up his chopsticks when he heard this. He paused for a moment before looking up. His gaze was cold and indifferent. That little bit of gentleness had already disappeared. It was so cold that it made one's back go numb. Weiwei Bai was about to take a whip to whip him when she saw how cold his gaze was. She suddenly felt that if she whipped him, she would probably lose 50 favorability points. She thought about the favorability points she had gained by pretending to be mentally retarded. Full text // Download. Chapter 2692. She was still a little reluctant. She immediately picked up the bowl obediently, picked up the spoon, and buried her head in the porridge. Don't forget that I want to eat meat in the future. You won't live a short life if you eat vegetarian every day. The girl's muttering voice was unusually cute, and there was nothing to be angry about even when she said harsh words. The coldness in Yu Xiaoyun's eyes slowly disappeared. He stared at her with her head lowered for a long time before slowly continuing to eat the porridge. After eating, Yu Xiaoyun very calmly cleaned up the dishes. Wei Bai, this was too automatic. There was no room for him to do anything. He couldn't whip her when she went to wash the dishes. This would definitely decrease her favorability. Although Yu Xiaoyun lived like a prince, he still had some skills when it came to doing things. Housework was not a technical job. It was just a matter of whether one did it or not. For Yu Xiaoyun, it didn't matter whether he could do it well or not. He roughly knew why she had chased away all the servants. At first, he thought it was because she felt that the servants were his people. Now, it was clear that she just wanted him to be a servant. She just wanted to humiliate him. Yu Xiaoyun finished washing the dishes and took a clean cotton cloth to wipe his hands unhurriedly. Why did she want to humiliate him? Did she really think that he was an enemy and that she hated him for stealing her by family? Yu Xiaoyun looked up at Love Garden casually and smiled coldly. Shouldn't she hate this place even more than he did? After all, everyone here bullied her. Including her who turned a blind eye to her miserable state. Wei Bai held a toy-like whip and bargained with the side quest. Side quest, such a small whip is tickling me. Wei Bai, you'll be happy if you kill the target. Anyway, you said a whip, but you didn't specify the size of the whip. This is it. It didn't hurt at all. In fact, it felt especially good. The favorability probably wouldn't decrease by much. Side quest, Wei Bai, damn you, can't you let me complete the side quest? Don't be such a jerk. If you continue like this, I'll quit. After I'm disfigured, I'll stick to you every day and make you take responsibility for the rest of my life. Side quest, this threat was too terrifying, and it made the branch system cower. After Yu Xiaoyun finished wiping his hands, he walked in and saw Wei Bai sitting on a chair. The girl held a small whip in her hand. It was small and thin, like a toy. He had no idea where it came from. She seemed to have just noticed his arrival and immediately stuffed the whip into her sleeve. Yu Xiaoyun didn't say much, but his eyes darkened, and then he revealed a smile. All right, let's go. Wei Bai looked at him blankly. Where are we going? Yu Xiaoyun walked in front of her. The handsome and mature man held her hand elegantly and naturally. When he lowered his eyes, the corners of his eyes were gentle and beautiful. Didn't you want all my assets? I signed my name last night, so I have to hold a meeting today to announce it. Moreover, you've just taken office, so you need to adjust the personnel and appease the people. For Wei Bai. She wasn't a novice when it came to these things. After all, managing a company was her strength. However, the side mission was to let her be the head of the household and be a strong female CEO. Wei Bai expressed that she wouldn't give what the side mission wanted. Therefore, the confusion in her eyes was even more obvious. She was so confused that she seemed to have become mentally retarded again. When Yu Xiaoyun saw her like this, the cold thoughts in his heart faded away. He smiled sympathetically. There are many assets. You will be a little busy, my master. The last word master was uttered affectionately, and it was indescribably numbing to the bone. Compared to being a servant, he looked more like a boy toy. Chapter 2693. Wei Wei Bai had no choice but to follow him to the meeting. Recently, Yu Xiaoyun's company was in a mess. The bomb incident was extremely chaotic, and the key elite leadership group had gone missing. The transformation of the maritime project was also completely stopped. All parties were waiting to see how Yu Xiaoyun's situation was, which led to many project collaborations being stopped. When there were a few elders in the middle who were not affected by the bomb, they were notified for a meeting. Everyone immediately gathered. After all, this was the first meeting after the incident. They all wanted to eat a reassuring pill. Then, Wei Wei Bai saw a bunch of aunties from the market. The elites and employees of Yu Xiaoyun's department were all transferred from the underworld. Originally, there were also civil servants who were recruited, but once they entered this place, they became loud voices after a long time. During the meeting, everyone was shouting, and they were just short of fighting. Yu son of AB*TCH, who adjusted the salary of the third department by 10%. Who doesn't know that the third department's performance in the past 6 months is the worst? Fuck, General Manager Chin, where's Secretary Zhang? Where did he go? Didn't he get blown up? If he's really dead, why didn't he send a message or send a wreath? Who's that in the seat? Young Master Yu's woman. Why is she sitting here? Wei Wei Bai sat there in a daze. Yu Xiaoyun put her here and said that he wanted her to announce it herself. She opened her mouth. Child, where's your man? He's our leader. You're courting death sitting there. Don't be arrogant. If young Master Yu sees you, you won't have a good life. Wei Wei Bai slammed the table and was about to shout, I'm your leader. Everyone hurriedly slammed the table. Fuck, is there anyone in charge of this company? Where's young Master Yu? Where's Manager Chin? The voice roared and completely drowned out Wei Wei Bai. Wei Wei Bai, Yu Xiaoyun did it on purpose. He must have done it on purpose. Yu Xiaoyun went home early. He was drinking tea when he heard the sound of running footsteps outside the door. The next moment, he heard Wei Wei Bai's angry voice. Yu Xiaoyun, you are doing this on purpose. Your people don't listen to me at all. Yu Xiaoyun took a sip of tea and remained calm. He said indifferently, Oh, is that so? As expected, the young lady who had rushed in was clenching her fists tightly. Her face was flushed, and her eyes were as bright as a cat's. I want to fire them. These are all your people. Yu Xiaoyun didn't have any reaction. His thin lips were moistened by the tea and were exceptionally red. Wei Wei Bai slammed her hands on the table angrily. I'm going to chase all of your men away. You better write me a notice. Yu Xiaoyun finally looked up. Are you sure? Wei Wei Bai fiercely nodded and said angrily, Yes, I'm sure. Yu Xiaoyun put down the teacup and slowly got up. Suddenly, he reached out and grabbed her arm, pulling it behind her back. Wei Wei Bai only felt dizzy as she was heavily pressed onto the table by Yu Xiaoyun. Teacups and everything else fell to the ground. The floor was a mess. Bai Weiwei was frightened and her whole body stiffened. She wanted to struggle, but found that her physical strength was too different from this man's. The man who was usually elegant and beautiful was as cold as a poisonous snake at this moment. I've given you everything you want. You can't handle it, but you still want me to handle it. His voice was indifferent. You're like a willful child who was bullied and rushed home to complain to the adults. You hate me, betray me, but rely on me so much. At this point, he stared at her sparkling eyes that were about to burst into tears. He whispered, Do you really hate me, or do you love me? Chapter 2694. Wei Wei Bai's pupils constricted, as if she was frightened. As if her thoughts were exposed, she opened her eyes fiercely and gritted her teeth, wanting to say something harsh. However, she found that her throat was blocked. She looked at him in surprise, worried that he would see through her thoughts. Yu Xiaoyun touched her frightened eyes with his fingertips. Do you love me? Is that why you hate me so much? Do you hate that I never had you in my eyes and let you be bullied by others? Or do you hate that I love you but lock you up? Wei Wei Bai shouted, No, I don't. She looked like she was desperately refuting his words. Yu Xiaoyun was stunned, and his heart trembled. He was just guessing, but he didn't expect to guess correctly. Wei Wei Bai was still retorting, Who loves you? You're just a dog in the Bai family. You'll always be a dog. I won't love you. If these words were usually said, it would be heartbreaking. But now, in her mouth, it became a shield for her anger and her unwillingness to admit her love. Yu Xiaoyun silently let her hit his chest, but he didn't feel any pain. After all, compared to when she betrayed him in the beginning, his heart was hurt by her indifference. This point was casually scolded by her, and it couldn't be taken as an attack at all. It really didn't matter. Yu Xiaoyun said gently, Okay, you don't love me. He looked like he didn't want to argue with a child. Then, he lowered his head and kissed her again. It was a gentle and soft kiss, and the nostalgia in his heart for her appeared again. Wei Wei Bai wanted to refuse, but the man coaxed softly, I'll give you a notice and let you fire me, okay? She was stunned. Yu Xiaoyun was a little amused at her cautious look, and then pinched her chin. You've lost weight. She wanted to shoulder the burden and be a strong woman. She also wanted to be his master. There were so many things that were difficult to control that she had to control. How could it be as comfortable as being in his arms? She would definitely lose some flesh. Yu Xiaoyun touched her cheek. Her soft skin made him squint his eyes. Bai Weiwei under him didn't resist at all. It was as if Yu Xiaoyun was her master and not a slave in her hands. Wei Wei Bai only let go of her when she was done pinching and rubbing against her. Then, he held her hand and helped her tidy up her clothes before leading her out. His so-called announcement was just a simple meeting in the company's meeting room. He gathered all the people who could talk. Those loud voices came again. Yu Xiaoyun was a gentle and calm person, noble and elegant. But everyone knew that the group of people he used were abnormally rough and unpresentable. At first, all his enemies were laughing at him. What happened later proved that he was right. This was because this group of people were famous for their loyalty. They were not afraid of death and did not care about short-term gains and losses. They did not haggle over every ounce. It was always Yu Xiaoyun who agreed to whatever he said. Moreover, after the guidance of the teachers hired by Yu Xiaoyun, they were already the backbone of the company. Yu Xiaoyun wanted obedient people, and these people only listened to him. Wei Wei Bai took his sign transfer of assets. The real estate was easier to deal with. The most difficult was the company and the various big projects. Fortunately, the Bai family's previous dark businesses had been castrated by him. Otherwise, how could Wei Wei Bai, such a delicate and impatient child, face those businesses? Yu Xiaoyun sat on the chair. Wei Wei Bai lay on the table with a dissatisfied expression. Just like before, when he came to the meeting, she accompanied him. But this time, she sat in the main seat. And Yu Xiaoyun sat in the second seat. Chapter 2695. He had a calm expression on his face as he flipped through the equity transfer agreement unhurriedly. The employees who had shouted at Wei Wei Bai just now were now shrinking into their shells like cowards, not daring to say anything. The scene was unusually quiet. It was strange. It was even heavy. Anyway, every time young Master Yu came, these old and boorish people would become little wives, not daring to say a word. In the future, you will listen to her, understand? Yu Xiaoyun's voice was very calm, like a gentle scholar, indescribably elegant and gentle. After he finished speaking, some people couldn't stand it anymore and were about to question him. However, they heard Yu Xiaoyun repeat again, understand? These two words were calm and indifferent. However, it made it impossible for people to protest. Everyone knew that Yu Xiaoyun was not used to repeating a sentence. Once he was asked to repeat it. Then, it was an extremely important order that had to be obeyed. Yu Xiaoyun looked at everyone calmly. The company, I have already signed the equity transfer agreement for all the properties that I can use now. The lawyer will come and notarize the property transfer agreement later. You guys can also be witnesses. After saying that, he glanced at Wei Wei Bai beside him indifferently. However, he saw her staring at him with her eyes full of doubt and vigilance. She seemed to think that he agreed too easily. Yu Xiaoyun smiled indifferently and then spread out the documents. In the future, the properties under this company will also belong to Wei Wei. She has the power to kill all of you. His words were unusually calm. He didn't care if the people present could bear it or not. Those who could attend the meeting in the conference room were the remaining elites. Now, these elites were shocked. They looked at Wei Wei Bai in disbelief as if they had eaten shit. Suddenly, one of them protested, Mr. Yu, this is against the rules. Even if you like her, you can't give such a big company to her. Abandoning his career for a woman. No one could imagine that Yu Xiaoyun was the one who did it. In the past, they couldn't wait for him to find a woman to control him so that he wouldn't become a vegetarian. In the end, a woman came and this master was going to abandon his career again. Couldn't he torment them less and give them some peace and quiet? Yu Xiaoyun repeated in a whisper, do you like it? That's right. He liked her so much that he was willing to indulge her. Yu Xiaoyun put down the pen and crossed his arms as if it had nothing to do with him. All right, don't tell me anything. I won't be your boss from now on. He was serious. Everyone looked at each other, their faces twitching as they looked at Wei Wei Bai, who was sitting in the middle. The young girl's face was pink and tender. She had just reached adulthood and was exceptionally cute. She was so cute that it made people want to punch her until she cried. She would definitely look good. Finally, a department manager who wore glasses and looked like a well-dressed beast stood up. He was a civil servant and looked like a department manager. Miss Bai, may I know what we should do when the person in charge of the Hainan Airlines project comes over to discuss the follow-up matters with us? The sea voyage was halted. This was a huge loss to Yu Xiaoyun. It was also a loss for those who had just signed the contract and saw that the project was going to fail. So in the past few days, many collaborators had come to ask for an explanation. Another department immediately stood up and said, it's not just the sea voyage project. We have also invested a huge amount of money in the Green Flower project that has just been launched. If we stop now, the group will suffer unimaginable losses. We might even go bankrupt. Chapter 2696. This topic came up. Everyone was noisy. Who didn't have a decent project in their department? They were facing a transition period, a bonus period, and a period of consolidation of industries after obtaining great power. If they didn't have a leader to properly organize and lead them, the power and funds in their hands would disappear. They might even close down due to poor management. That department didn't want to become the sinner that caused the company to close down. All kinds of documents, all kinds of accountability, and all kinds of requests came. Wei Wei Bai's front was suddenly filled with problematic documents. Her snow-white little face was about to be drowned in these folders. Yu Xiaoyun was drinking tea. The secretary had brought it up. It was a high-quality green tea. He instructed the people around him in a low voice, "Just serve Miss Juice. She hasn't been eating much recently and has a bad appetite. She can't drink too much tea." Finally, it was time for the juice. Only then did Yu Xiaoyun look up at her. This table full of things was also a show of strength to Wei Wei Bai. Sure enough, he saw her looking at a pile of clueless work with a dazed expression. Yu Xiaoyun saw that the corners of her eyes were red, as if she didn't know what to do. He quietly curled the corners of his mouth, then placed the juice by her hand. He also quietly drank his tea, having no intention of helping at all. They were still making a ruckus. Everyone was rushing to let Wei Wei Bai make the decision. Wei Wei Bai sometimes wanted to open her mouth to say something, but she realized that no one was listening to her because everyone's voice was louder than hers. Yu Xiaoyun's gaze quietly fell on her helpless little expression, and then his gaze also fell on her neck. She was still wearing a cheongsam with light floral patterns today. Under the fragmented flowers was the beautiful outline of a young girl's body. Her wrists that were exposed to the sleeves were more attractive and fair than a washed lotus root. Her extremely beautiful calves were faintly discernible at the slit of the cheongsam. Finally, those calves moved. Wei Wei Bai stood up, turned around, and sat on Yu Xiaoyun's lap. Yu Xiaoyun almost spilled the tea in his hand. Wei Wei Bai hugged Yu Xiaoyun's neck with both hands, bit his ear and said discontentedly, "You're making fun of me." Yu Xiaoyun blinked his eyes. He was a little dazed. He carefully held the teacup and felt a warmth on his thigh. It was the warmth and softness of a young girl. He shook his head gently. "Am I not giving you a chance to make a decision? Now, these industries are yours, the company is yours, and the employees should also be managed by you, lest you say that I'm depriving you of your rights." The old fox's words were impeccable. Wei Wei Bai couldn't think of a rebuttal for a moment. Suddenly, she found that the surroundings were quiet. The employees stared at the two of them. Because Wei Wei Bai sat directly on Yu Xiaoyun's lap. It was rare to see Yu Xiaoyun, a vegetarian, carrying a woman so casually. Everyone knew that young Master Yu had a woman. However, he was too immortal and too clean, causing many people to think that his woman was drinking tea with him. In the end, they saw something. Yu Xiaoyun's fingers were already clasping Wei Wei Bai's waist, and his fingertips were quietly caressing the softness on the side of her waist. This action was very flirtatious. Wei Wei Bai looked up and glared fiercely. Many people calmly lowered their heads and pretended not to see. Yu Xiaoyun smiled. "What's wrong? Let's deal with the matter first." Although he said that, he didn't stop her from sitting on his lap. Wei Wei Bai suddenly hugged him and said, "You are my chair." Yu Xiaoyun glanced at her indifferently, but saw that her clear eyes were filled with cute stubbornness. Chapter 2697. She said, "I want you to be my chair, otherwise they won't be quiet." Yu Xiaoyun stared at her calmly for a few seconds. Wei Wei Bai said fiercely, "You have to listen to me. You're my chair." When she spoke, her movements were a little big, and her calf was even close to his leg. The fragrance of a young girl followed the strength of her rubbing and directly pressed against him. Yu Xiaoyun was silent for a long time before he continued to take a sip of tea to moisten his dry throat. "Yes, I'll be your chair," he whispered, his voice lingering. Wei Wei Bai sat on Yu Xiaoyun's lap, then turned to face the table, ignoring the surprised gazes of others, and started to work. The work was very messy. The various projects were also intricate and gave people a headache. Wei Wei Bai was annoyed and couldn't wait to throw away the documents. Yu Xiaoyun was not surprised at all to see that she was annoyed. He even gave her pointers from time to time, wanting her to get the hang of it quickly. She couldn't see the pain of having her business taken away from her at all. Anyway, it was enough for him to accompany her no matter what she wanted. The meeting lasted until dark, and they finally got off work. Many of the ideas were decided by Yu Xiaoyun. Wei Wei Bai even felt that there were some problems that couldn't be decided, so he had to solve them. When they returned home, Wei Wei Bai was so tired that her eyelids were dozing off. She nodded and was carried by Yu Xiaoyun. He said, "Are you happy being your chair for a day?" Wei Wei Bai lay on his back in a daze. "Yes, I'm happy." Another side mission was completed. Yu Xiaoyun walked forward, followed by the bodyguard and the driver. He didn't put her down. He would rather walk a few steps and carry the girl behind him. "If you like, you can sit every day in the future." Wei Wei Bai sneered. "Don't try to please me. I won't return those people to you. If I really give them to you, you won't be obedient." Yu Xiaoyun stopped in his tracks, but his expression was still indifferent. "Do you want me to be obedient?" Wei Wei Bai was tired and impatient. "Nonsense. If I don't ask you to be obedient, why would I touch your things? I hate you the most. Everyone scolds me, beats me, and calls me a jinx, a little monster who cursed my mother to death." Yu Xiaoyun took a deep breath and finally said, "I didn't scold you." Bai Weiwei's fingers gripped his shoulders. Her fingertips exerted some force, and her voice trembled. "But you ignored me and treated me like air. You are more hateful than anyone else. You didn't even look at me. I swear that one day, I will stand in a position that you can't reach. Then, I will ignore you and let you have a taste of me." Yu Xiaoyun carefully went over her words in his mind. It was a little sad, but there was also a hint of sweetness in it. So, she cared about him that much. Wei Wei Bai's voice was a little choked up. "I did it. You're my servant now. Everything you have is mine. Am I better than you? You can't ignore me anymore." Yu Xiaoyun really wanted to laugh, but he felt a little uncomfortable. Her inferiority complex, crazy, forbearing and twisted mentality was filled with many painful days. Yu Xiaoyun finally murmured in a low voice, "Am I that important to you?" Wei Wei Bai didn't hear clearly for a while and just scolded in a low voice, "Listen to me obediently in the future. Obey me, okay?" Yu Xiaoyun walked under the moonlight. The moonlight pulled their shadows together. After a long silence, she heard the man's voice. He said, okay." His voice was lazy and calm, but there was a trace of indulgence. "Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 75. //." Chapter 2698. Wei Wei Bai silently ticked the completion on her completion list. She poured tea and did it. She helped him with the work. She handed the documents to him and did it. Although she did it casually and didn't ask him not to move, the task list showed that it was completed. She said that he was a dog and completed it. He even treated it as a chair and completed it. Very good, she was just short of a whip and a massage. In the end, he admitted that he was better than her. Oh right, she was still short of feeding. Feeding, Wei Wei Bai silently looked up, held a spoon, and stared at Yu Xiaoyun, who was eating breakfast opposite her. There were no servants at home. Now, only their room was left, and the corridor was relatively clean. The 3 meals were simple. After all, Yu Xiaoyun wasn't a good cook. It was also because he was talented and had strong hands-on skills that he could cook 3 simple meals a day in the kitchen. Yu Xiaoyun was also the one who cleaned up. In the middle of the night, she asked him to pour water and bring tea or something. He could also immediately get honey water and flower tea. He could also get 2 snacks for her. She heard that he had recently baked according to the recipe and put it in the refrigerator, waiting for her to eat it when she wanted to. Yu Xiaoyun did the work of pouring tea and serving people smoothly, and it wasn't degrading at all. It was just that the garden was too big, and no one cleaned up the pool of dead flowers. It looked bleak. Yu Xiaoyun seemed to have noticed the other party's gaze. He looked up and saw Wei Wei Bai holding a bowl. The corners of her eyes were a little red, and she was staring at him softly. There seemed to be some desire in her eyes. He paused. What did she desire? However, the girl's eyelashes trembled slightly. She immediately looked away and didn't say anything. Yu Xiaoyun thought for a moment and finally picked up a crispy side dish for her on the small plate in front of her. Eat. His tone was incomparably calm. It was just a trivial matter. The corner of Wei Wei Bai's eyes twitched. Then she snorted coldly and ate the porridge vigorously, ignoring him. Yu Xiaoyun thought for a while expressionlessly. Was it not enough? So he picked up a few more dishes. In the end, the other party ignored him even more. He even sat sideways, as if he couldn't wait to show him his back. Yu Xiaoyun looked at her innocently. He didn't seem to know what he had done wrong. The meal was somewhat depressing. Because Wei Wei Bai had taken over the business, she had to attend many meetings to sort out the business. There were also follow-up meetings for the project. The Hainan Airlines project had been stopped for too long. Everyone exploded. Wei Wei Bai sat at the head of the table. Because she had lost too many key leaders, she had to do everything. They came to her for all kinds of problems, and the stacked folders were almost taller than her head. Wei Wei Bai felt that even if she didn't look at it, she could still sign from morning to night. Yu Xiaoyun, on the other hand, was rather leisurely. He ordered a pot of de hong pao and sat on the side with a few books. He was in no hurry at all. Even when he saw that Wei Wei Bai was in a terrible fix, he still had the mood to smile. Finally, after busying herself for half a day, Wei Wei Bai realized that she had only done a little. She leaned on the table weakly. You weren't this busy before. She muttered unhappily. The girl was wearing a light purple cheongsam today, which he had prepared for her. He had even woven a dark purple crystal collar for her. Although it wasn't worth much compared to jade, it was exceptionally beautiful and pure. His gaze rested on the girl's slender waist and the delicate neck that was exposed under the collar of the cheongsam. After admiring it for a while, he said calmly, because someone helped me. Chapter 2699. Wei Wei Bai looked up and her eyes lit up. She immediately asked, who helped? Yu Xiaoyun couldn't help but laugh. Of course it's the group of people you locked up. Otherwise, why would I be so carefree? However, to win over this group of people, I spent about 6 years. To transform the industry, I also connected with the foreign market 4 years in advance. At this point, he was silent for a while before he said in a low voice, although I'm not as busy as you, I spend more time than you, and my life is much more dangerous than yours. Wei Wei Bai was about to sneer and retort. However, she saw a rare serious expression in the man's eyes under his eyelashes. His words were light, but every sentence was heavy. In the Bai family, I was stepping on a steel wire. I was pulling out my backbone. I was suppressing my self-esteem and humanity as a person. No one has suffered more than me, Wei Wei. Wei Wei Bai fell silent. Yu Xiaoyun smiled helplessly. You have suffered a little. You pretended to be crazy and lived in a world of resentment. But I can't. Old Master Bai needs me to be a qualified young master. He needs me as a living signboard. This was the meaning of his life. Old Master Bai killed his most loyal old subordinate who had sacrificed the most for him. This was more than chilling. If old Master Bai didn't raise him well and let others see that the death of his old subordinate was just an accident, and his child lived a noble and beautiful life, then how could he appease people? Yu Xiaoyun's voice was soft. So if I'm crazy, I'll have no value. I can only slap old Master Bai's face. If I have ambitions, I can only die. If I'm not good enough, I'll wait to be abandoned. He wanted him to become good and outstanding. He wanted people to know that the Bai family treated him well. He also wanted him to become mediocre and not be allowed to be dissatisfied with the Bai family and have any thoughts of resistance. The path he walked was one that could drive people crazy. All these years, he had almost divided himself. He had a kind and gentle appearance, but inside, he was calculating and dark desires. It was like a spider that didn't move at all. Using the weakest threads to weave a net, it finally revealed its ferocious face and completely devoured the Bai family. This was more than just frightening. It could be said that every step was fatal. Wei Bai held the document and looked at him without moving her eyes. Yu Xiaoyun, on the other hand, was leisurely. His movements were graceful as he gently poured tea for himself with a purple clay teapot. Then he held the teacup and smiled. What's wrong? Are you scared? Don't be afraid, didn't I castrate the Bai clan and put it in your hands? Everything you have right now is safe. Of course, it was because he was by her side that she felt so safe. No matter what, he was the one who had plotted to get all these properties, and the people were all his. Then, even if the industry was transferred, the people's hearts would not be transferred. Wasn't it because he was here that the people below were willing to bring up the project proposal? After all, who didn't know that Yu Xiaoyun had lost his head over a woman? To make her happy, he would throw away thousands of gold and abandon his career. Therefore, even if she took everything from him, she would still be his woman. What she had was still his label. Before she made any big moves, everyone still thought that the company belonged to Yu Xiaoyun. Yu Xiaoyun didn't say these things. He also didn't let people say it. His fingertips gently touched the edge of the teacup, and his eyes were full of affection. He was worried that he would hurt her and make her feel even more unbalanced. This way, she would find him even more unpleasant to the eye. Fast fast. Chapter 2700. Yu Xiaoyun stole a glance at Wei Bai. He found the girl lying on the document. Under her thick eyelashes, her round eyes were filled with infatuation. Her eyes were filled with love and admiration. Yu Xiaoyun's fingertips paused, and his breathing slowly became hot. The girl seemed to have suddenly noticed his gaze and immediately looked away. The infatuation from before disappeared. She muttered, "Didn't you destroy the Bai family? You're so happy about your revenge. Why are you acting pitiful?" Yu Xiaoyun drank his tea unhurriedly. When his lips touched the tea, he couldn't help but smile. Oh, she was smart. She knew that he was acting pitiful. Unfortunately, someone was still moved. Yu Xiaoyun thought about the infatuation in her eyes just now. He didn't know how long she had been secretly in love with him. That was why she targeted him so much and wanted to be as strong as him. So many people bullied her, but she didn't resent them. She only resented him for neglecting her. Wasn't it because she cared too much about him that she missed him so much? Yu Xiaoyun couldn't help but think, when did she start to miss him? How long had she missed him? All these years, there were too many people who liked him and even risked their lives for him. Instead, he had never noticed her in the corner, curled up in the darkness. Yu Xiaoyun's heart ached when he thought of this. This kind of pain was actually very painful. He pondered for a long time before he realized that this kind of pain was pity and regret for missing out on her. Suddenly, He heard Wei Wei Bai throw the document on the ground. What's written on this? Are the people under you illiterate? I want to fire them. Yu Xiaoyun said, yes, you can fire them. This calm attitude made Wei Wei Bai speechless. She couldn't say anything. Yu Xiaoyun said very politely, do you want me to write a notice or something for you? Wei Wei Bai grabbed the document and covered half of her face. Her two big round eyes stared at him. It was as if she was observing if there was something wrong with him. Yu Xiaoyun pursed his lips and smiled, looking elegant and gentlemanly. What? What else do you need me to do? Wei Wei Bai's long eyelashes drooped down, covering the light in her eyes. Yu Xiaoyun, have you liked me for a long time? When Yu Xiaoyun heard this, his eyes lit up, and he looked exceptionally beautiful. But he didn't say anything. Wei Wei Bai said, otherwise, why are you so obedient? Or are you trying to gain my trust so that I will release your rude subordinates? Yu Xiaoyun's expression became even gentler. The man's deep affection in his eyes was thick and soft, doting and indulging. He leaned against the chair, his fingers suddenly clasping the armrest of her chair, pulling her and the chair over so that they were pressed against each other. Wei Wei Bai was in a daze, holding a pile of folders in her hands. She frowned and was about to protest. Yu Xiaoyun asked softly, why have you been staring at my mouth since this morning? Wei Wei Bai's expression suddenly changed. She couldn't help but look at his lips again. The thin red color was stained with the moisture of the tea, adding a layer of delicate soft light. The man's appearance was too elegant, and there was a sense of clean abstinence. So, just a little bit of temptation would be magnified 10 times. Wei Wei Bai only stared for 2 seconds before she immediately looked away, her face turning red. Why are you looking at your mouth? It's because you've been eating since this morning. Yu Xiaoyun was used to enjoying himself. After breakfast, he liked to eat some fruits. /T. Chapter 2701. After eating the fruit, he came to work with her. Seeing that she was tired out and was watching a show, he had to make tea and was idling by the side. Yu Xiaoyun lowered his eyes and his voice was slightly hoarse. Do you want to eat too? Wei Wei Bai threw the document on the table, then leaned back in her chair and placed her hands in front of her chest. The arms that stretched out from the sleeves of the cheongsam were white and pink. It could be seen that she had indeed been fattened up by him recently. Her pearl-colored skin was so delicate that people couldn't help but want to touch it. Bai Weiwei was like a grandpa. Her sweet, tender, and delicate voice was raised quite a bit. If I want to eat, you can still feed me. Yu Xiaoyun's smile deepened. He opened his thin lips slightly and licked his lower lip with the tip of his tongue. The man's clean expression was instantly replaced by an evil charm. How do you want me to feed you? Wei Wei Bai was stunned. The man's hand had already touched her arm. The soft skin on her arm felt numb under his fingertips. Soon, he saw that there was an additional layer of light pink on her fair skin, like a lotus petal that had not withered, soft, thin, and warm. Yu Xiaoyun did not have the appearance of a graceful and elegant young master. His body was almost leaning out diagonally. That pair of light and warm eyes were replaced by a strong burning heat at this moment. His every word carried a sense of coercion. What do you want me to feed you? Wei Wei Bai leaned against the back of the chair tightly and stared at him with wide eyes. She seemed to be frightened. However, Yu Xiaoyun's fingertips touched her chin. His fingertips rubbed against the skin of her chin and gradually increased the strength. Finally, the fingertips came to her lips. Yu Xiaoyun's eyes curved slightly. The clean and beautiful man was bewitching and evil at this moment. He was like a ghost peeping in the dark, quiet and harmless. However, after seeing what he wanted, he finally showed the strength to attack, wanting to pull the temptation into his arms and tie it up. Wei Wei Bai was like a pitiful little sacrifice, curled up in the chair and shivering. She was so scared that the pink color on her face disappeared. She continued to sneer, "Do I need to say what I'm going to say? How are you going to serve me if you don't even know what to do? You can go and find out what I like to eat." Yu Xiaoyun's eyes became much more profound and obscure. He said slowly, "Yes, I should ask around." After saying that, he obediently let go of her hand and sat back down. He even moved his chair away. The stalemate between the two of them was finally over. Wei Wei Bai heaved a sigh of relief. She reached out and took the document. Just when she thought that she was safe, a voice came from behind her. However, she heard Yu Xiaoyun casually ask, "Do you like osmanthus cake? It's made from fresh osmanthus flowers that were just harvested this year." Wei Wei Bai was also hungry, and she had been brewing for a long time. Yu Xiaoyun should also do something, such as feeding her a piece of cake with his hand. Feeding pastries was no different from feeding rice. He could also explain the side quest. Therefore, she nodded without warning. In the blink of an eye, she saw Yu Xiaoyun take a small bite of the pastry. The powder of the pastry stained his lips. It was very tempting. Wei Wei Bai, Yu Xiaoyun also smiled. Then he reached out and pressed her neck, turning her upper body. He also lowered his head. The taste of the pastry. It was sweet and soft. There was the fragrance of osmanthus flowers, so fragrant that it made people's scalp tingle. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 80/T. Chapter 2702. Feeding to increase favorability, feeding to make the male protagonist stronger, and the host weaker and more pitiful. This was not the main female protagonist strategy route of the side quest. The side quest looked at the list of small tasks completed one by one. It felt that it was beginning to doubt Jixing. The system patted its head and comforted it, "You will get used to it." After that, the system continued to gnaw on the duck feet in the side quest's refrigerator. It had recently gained weight, eat some claws to aid digestion. Side quest, damn it, did this host system not know the virtue of shame? Wei Wei Bai listened to the sad conversation between the side quest and the system, her face indifferent. She was used to it, no matter how much the main system's lackeys, side quest, destroyed her. She was still the most beautiful flower in the storm. She went with the wind and waves. She stood tall. Wei Wei Bai, ha 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 ha, I am a pitiful, peerless, and independent beauty. Side quest. Ugh. It was wrong, these two guys did not want Face was not worthy of them anymore. Wei Wei Bai had just finished laughing when she saw Yu Xiaoyun, who was sleeping on the chair and covering the book, suddenly twitch his fingers. It seemed that he was having a nightmare. She frowned and reached out to gently press down on his hand. Then she took away his book, revealing his pale face. If it was before, he would wake up with this little movement. But this time, he obviously fell into a deeper nightmare, and did not wake up. Wei Wei Bai whispered softly, "Yu Xiaoyun." The man lying on the chair suddenly opened his eyes. His calm and gentle eyes were now occupied by coldness and a trace of fear. He saw the girl next to him holding his fingers with both hands. The girl's tender face had worry and fear that could not be put away in time. In an instant, the coldness that broke free from the nightmare was warmed by her worried eyes. Yu Xiaoyun seemed to be relieved, his face had a sickly white color. He suddenly murmured in a low voice, "Hug me." Wei Wei Bai was stunned, his cold fingers had already clasped her fingertips. It was like begging, his face was expressionless, and his voice had no waves. But there was a sense of vulnerability. "Hug me, Wei Wei." Wei Wei Bai squatted by the chair, just enough to reach out and hug his waist. She hesitated for a moment, and finally leaned her face on his leg, just like in the past. She laid on his body lazily like a cat, his fingers, and did not let go. The intimate and somewhat awkward posture. But it was undoubtedly exceptionally beautiful. Suddenly, a forceful kiss came from the top of her head. Yu Xiaoyun had already bent down and lowered his head. He lowered his eyes and kissed her hair. His fingers also started to warm up. The man who walked out of the nightmare did not need to face again, calm. The first thing he saw when he opened his eyes was the girl's worried expression. He walked out of the darkness and actually stopped taking pictures. He had struggled in the Bai family for too long. Although he looked fine on the outside, his insides were already riddled with holes. He thought that he was attached to power and loved it. Only then did he try his best to bring the Bai clan under his control. But when everything was on the right track, his career began to take a turn for the better. But the nightmares were becoming more and more frequent, and the split in his heart was becoming more and more serious. It turned out that power was just a straw for him to redeem himself. Now that he had this straw in his hand, he knew that he could not stop himself from sinking. His resentment and self-loathing still existed. It turned into a terrible nightmare that haunted him. The evil self in the dream had already begun to dismember him. He was in too much pain. He longed for someone to hug him and hold him all the time. Fast to read / fast to txt download fast to read on. Fast, comma. Chapter 2703. It prevented him from falling into the nightmare of splitting and dismembering himself. The girl's body finally made him feel warm. His breath was filled with her fragrance. He whispered, "Really, I like you very much." Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 85. Wei Wei Bai narrowed her eyes. She felt that this favorability came too easily, but she also felt that the other party was just too fragile. So a hug could move him. Wei Wei Bai thought of this and didn't move, continuing to lean on him. She wanted to see if she could get some more favorability. And Yu Xiaoyun also liked the way she relied on him. The two of them were very quiet in a pile of documents. The scene was very warm. The system patted the head of the branch again. The branch said, Wei Wei Bai said that she hugged Yu Xiaoyun for a long time, although she didn't get any favorability. But in the end, when she got off work, he actually tidied up all her documents and gave the orders that should be given. Those that should be solved were solved, and those that should be signed were signed by her. Everything was, using 1/10 of the time she did. Although Wei Wei Bai deliberately let him work and deliberately let him do the work, she really couldn't solve so many things as quickly as Yu Xiaoyun. And it looked like he was doing it with ease. She finally knew why he didn't look very busy. Because he worked at an inhuman speed. When she returned home, Love Garden was still very bleak. The cold wind and the cold leaves blew, and the quiet Bai family mansion was like a gorgeous seabed tomb. Only one room was lit up, and there was a sign of life. Yu Xiaoyun stood at the door, wearing light blue cotton casual clothes. He quietly looked at the silent Love Garden, his eyes silent. Suddenly, he heard the bathroom door open. His eyes flashed, and finally there was a trace of warmth. Yu Xiaoyun turned around and took a towel. He walked in front of Wei Wei Bai, who had just come out, and pressed the towel on her head. Her beautiful long hair was very long. It wasn't easy to wipe it. But Yu Xiaoyun didn't feel annoyed at all. He looked at that white and cute little face in the messy wet hair and only wanted to kiss it. Of course, he didn't reveal this intention. He didn't even touch her much. It was like self-abuse. Just like that, he held her and spoiled her. He let her do whatever she wanted, riding on him like a fox. Yu Xiaoyun dried her hair and carried her to the rocking chair. The young girl obediently sat on the chair. Her feet were touched by him, but he didn't mind and gently wiped her feet for her. At this moment, she was like a cute kitten, looking at him with narrowed eyes. As the chair rocked back and forth, she rested her hands on the chair, looking as innocent as a child. Yu Xiaoyun helped her put on her cotton shoes and poured her a cup of honey water. Wei Weibai held the honey water and felt that Yu Xiaoyun had done a really good job, too good. If he didn't know about his previous behavior, those who didn't know better would think that he was born to be a servant. Yu Xiaoyun was obedient. He took out a book and said, "Today, we're learning about human resources management." Bai Weiwei immediately nodded, her pair of squinted eyes widening. When the man saw her like this, he couldn't help but smile. Then, he told her in a low voice about the complexity of the company's human resources, the relationship between people, and the intricate interests of each department. Even though it was obviously very difficult, he could always easily explain it to her. After Wei Weibai heard this, she couldn't help but frown in confusion. The Hainan Airlines project has been stopped. Is it a big blow to the company? Chapter 2704. Yu Xiaoyun said unhurriedly, "Yes." Wei Weibai, then the company is going bankrupt. Yu Xiaoyun, if the Hainan Airlines project is stopped, half of it will indeed go bankrupt. Wei Weibai drank a mouthful of honey water and pursed her lips, looking dissatisfied. Yu Xiaoyun looked at her with a hint of interest in his lazy eyes. "Why, don't you want it to go bankrupt?" Wei Weibai swallowed the water and almost choked herself to death. She gasped and said, "You worked so hard to get it." Yu Xiaoyun dragged out his last word meaningfully. "Oh, I got it." Wei Weibai realized that she was too anxious. She immediately straightened her face. "The company is mine now. How can I squander it if it goes bankrupt? I still want to live a good life." Yu Xiaoyun pursed his lips and smiled. His cold and elegant appearance had a hint of amiable gentleness. "Good life? What kind of good life? Tell me." Wei Weibai looked at him sideways. She was about to say something but paused. Instead, she regained her senses and bit her red lips. Then, she imitated his hypocritical look and glanced at him. Her clear eyes intertwined with a clear and delicate charm. The look in her eyes made people feel itchy. "What does it have to do with you?" She pretended to be calm, but she couldn't help being a little girl. She was unspeakably cute. Yu Xiaoyun's eyes heated up, but his tone was still calm. "It's okay. Apart from our huge loss if the Hainan Airlines project is stopped, there are also a few partners who signed the contract. Their losses are also huge. If this project fails, we will only be half bankrupt, but they will be bankrupt." Yu Xiaoyun said this and supported his chin with his hand. There was a hint of stunning sharpness in his lazy eyes. "So, you have to protect yourself well." Wei Weibai blinked innocently. "Protect herself?" Yu Xiaoyun's soft lips moved slightly. "Because you caused the project to fail, you are the enemy of many, many people. Spider's actions were all planned out. How could he not drag others down with him for such a big project? He gave himself a way out. He did lose a lot if the project stopped. But it wasn't the most anxious. Because those who had signed the contract were more anxious." Yu Xiaoyun looked at Wei Weibai, who was still confused, and sighed helplessly. "You're really a child." She was indeed quite young at this age. She was so young that he couldn't bear to. Bai Weiwei sneered, but her eyes were exceptionally clear and bright, with a lively aura. "I am not you, I am a woman." The girl's smiling face as she sat on the rocking chair was so beautiful that people couldn't take their eyes off her. Yu Xiaoyun only felt that the hidden impulse in his heart was climbing up bit by bit. He smiled and didn't comment, but his eyes fell on her ankle. They were as fragile as the bones of a butterfly's wings, easily broken with a pinch. But Yu Xiao, the Hainan Airlines project was stopped, and the biggest business partner demanded an explanation. Yu Xiaoyun indicated that to appease them, they had to hold a meeting first. As long as it was within half a year, the losses could be controlled. Wei Bai planned to control it for 3 months. Only 2 months had passed. The only thing left on the side mission list was to give her a massage and admit that she was amazing. None of them were difficult. Because there was still time, Wei Bai didn't force Yu Xiaoyun to do them. The right time to do these missions was a matter of interest. Chapter 2705. It wouldn't drop the favorability. It wasn't easy to maintain the favorability of Yu Xiaoyun, a man with a spider-like personality. The meeting was held as planned. At the restaurant on the clouds last time, Yu Xiaoyun was still sitting in the second seat. Wei Bai already had some of his composure. She sat calmly. A total of 8 people came to the meeting. They were the elite sent by the company that cooperated with the Hainan Airlines project. Wei Bai was very calm and took out the prepared speech. There were major omissions in the Hainan Airlines project and it needed to be re-examined. The restarting event was about a month later. Everyone who came to the meeting agreed. The scene was very harmonious. Yu Xiaoyun leaned back in his chair and looked at the scene with a strange and quiet gaze. He seemed to have discovered something, but also seemed to be waiting for something. The meeting ended and everyone stood up to leave. Wei Bai also stood up. Her attitude was natural and generous. The other party reached out to shake her hand. She didn't think much about it and reached out to shake it. However, a hand came across the air and held the other party's hand. It was Yu Xiaoyun. He said calmly and elegantly, "I look forward to the cooperation when the project restarts." The other party smiled and said, Of course. As soon as he finished speaking, everything happened so fast that it was terrifying. The other party had already taken out a palm thunder and pulled Yu Xiaoyun over with lightning speed. Wei Bai's expression changed drastically and she reached out to stop him. Everything was too late. The palm was already pressed tightly against Yu Xiaoyun's neck. Everyone collectively retreated. The leader who was happy in the meeting just now looked at Wei Bai coldly. The Hainan Airlines project must be restarted immediately. We don't accept any delay in time. Wei Bai's pupils constricted. Her body trembled and she almost couldn't stand. However, she quickly held on and said coldly in a trembling voice, "Let go of him, or you won't be able to walk out of here alive." The leader in the meeting shouted ferociously, "I can walk out of here as long as I have Yu Xiaoyun's life. There is a Hainan Airlines project on the table. You are in charge now. If you want him to live, sign for me immediately. I want the maritime navigation project to start. This is our only request. We won't accept any damn delays." Wei Bai clenched her fists, her eyes cold. "You're threatening me with his life." These words were said harshly. The usually slender and cute girl's face was now cold and full of killing intent. Even Yu Xiaoyun's calm expression was somewhat moved when he saw her crazy appearance. But he didn't say anything. Instead, he quietly stared at her with an unusually secretive gaze. He seemed to want to know what her choice was. The leader shouted fiercely, "Nonsense, you know how valuable Yu Xiaoyun's life is. If he dies, you'll be nothing." Bai Weiwei's originally pale face, at this moment, was even paler, with a kind of frightening resentment. She stood by the table, her fingers propped up on the table. On her face, only her lips were bright red, as if they were stained with blood, but also as if they were on fire. The young girl's expression had never been so fierce, so miserable. Her voice was as soft as silk and as cold as ice. Do you think I care about him? I'm in charge now. I won't start the project he started. I won't save his life. The last sentence was said with incomparable ruthlessness. The young girl's eyes were red, but it wasn't because of tears of fear. It was because of hatred. This hatred came from the Bai family, from the anger of being bullied since childhood, and from the pain of being neglected. Chapter 27:06. Yu Xiaoyun stared at her without blinking. He didn't miss the trembling of her fingers as she pinched her palm. He also didn't miss the strength that she wanted to rush over at any time. Although it was suppressed, it seemed that her limbs were struggling abnormally. He lowered his eyes slightly and sighed inaudibly. Then he moved his fingertips, which seemed to be a secret signal. The person holding him hostage immediately sneered, "I don't believe you. I'll give you 3 days. If you don't sign, I'll send Yu Xiaoyun's body to your door in 3 days. Leave." Just like that, they held Yu Xiaoyun hostage and walked out. Wei Bai, who was standing by the table, had a change in expression. She seemed to want to chase after them, but she was extremely hesitant. Yu Xiaoyun saw from the corner of his eye that the redness at the corners of her eyes had finally turned into tears of fear and grievance. She was like an abandoned cat, exceptionally pitiful. Yu Xiaoyun was taken into the car, and the car drove out quickly. The people in the car were very quiet for a moment. Yu Xiaoyun also sat casually. The person who was extremely arrogant just now had already handed over the weapon to him obediently. Then he asked casually, "Brother Yu, why are you acting like this?" Yu Xiaoyun looked at the scenery outside the car window. The light fell on his snow-white and delicate face, making his expression even clearer and quieter. He said in a low voice, "I just want to give her a choice." The person who helped was extremely puzzled. Yu Xiaoyun smiled, "Choose me or choose the country I've built." If Wei Bai had signed her name just now, it would be equivalent to her giving up everything she pursued and choosing him. If she hadn't chosen to sign her name, she would have given up on him. Yu Xiaoyun looked outside with a deep gaze, thinking about her pitiful appearance before she left. It seems that she lost the bet. She still prefers my business, not me. What an immature cat. But he couldn't hate her. Maybe it was because she was too immature, so when she made a mistake, he also thought that it would be good if he could forgive her. The person beside him immediately said, "It hasn't been 3 days yet, right? She might change her mind in 3 days. Women are all like this. They change their minds every day." No other emotions could be seen from Yu Xiaoyun's expression, but there was a trace of gentleness in his cold eyes. His eyes, which were originally filled with deep emotions, were as beautiful as a spring breeze brushing past the willows. "I hope so. Of course, if she still chooses her career, I won't blame her. Who asked me to spoil her so much?" Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 80. 5 points down. Wei Bai looked at her own hand and said with a trembling voice, "Damn, Yu Xiaoyun's hand is too fast. I thought I could grab that guy's hand and then pull him over to snatch the weapon from his arms." She had long felt that the atmosphere was not right. Tell the system to be careful. He didn't expect to see a weapon in his opponent's hand. What was even stranger was that there were no bullets in the weapon. Wei Bai, who had always been very sensitive to schemes, immediately contacted Yu Xiaoyun. He realized that this could be one of his schemes. Therefore, she planned to expose the fact that the other party had a weapon. However, he was not as fast as Yu Xiaoyun. Just like that, Yu Xiaoyun was 1 step ahead of him. He made a cliché, "If you don't choose anything, you will kill whoever you want." He didn't care about the streets. If this was a normal situation, it would be a gift of favorability points. However, when the other party asked her to choose to sign immediately, the side mission reminded her that if she signed immediately, it was guaranteed that she would fail and be disfigured in minutes. Listening to the side mission's arrogant laughter, Wei Wei Bai withered. The system said, he can still be saved. Can't we just save the target in 3 days? Wei Wei Bai said, save my ass. Yu Xiaoyun is very safe. It just needs my attitude. I have failed to activate the side mission. If I don't activate it, I will face the risk of Yu Xiaoyun's favorability dropping to 0. At this point, Wei Wei Bai paused. She said with a heavier tone, and the main mission will fail. Because for a man like Yu Xiaoyun, once he failed to open the door to his heart, there would not be a second chance. The system felt that with its host's ability, it might not be that bad. It was about to comfort her. But it hurt again. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 75. The system, Wei Wei Bai said, this hypocrite says that he doesn't care. Once he really doesn't care, his favorability will drop endlessly. The system said, how about, just torture him? By Wei Wei. At the /crossover system, Adonis, come here and read the full article at https://www.sashu.com. Download the read the full text. 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 To make it easier for you to read it next time, you can click the button at the bottom to record the reading record. The book, please recommend it to your friends, QQ, blog, WeChat, etc. Chapter 2707. The System Suggestion. Wei Wei Bai thought for a while, then nodded, torture is good. Give me a terminal illness pill or something, I'll be miserable after eating it. The system, Wei Wei Bai, have you used terminal illness before? The system, what illness have you not used before? Venereal disease. Wei Wei Bai touched his chin, then forget it, it's too old-fashioned. The system was shocked, didn't you say the older the better? Wei Wei Bai, the time is still to be determined. If it's really terminal illness, I'll die and become a ghost and still follow Yu Xiaoyun around every day, I'll be bored out of my mind. It was good to have more people, they could jump, play, and act. As a ghost, she floated around Yu Xiaoyun miserably every day, watching him eat, drink, and play. She was sullen. Wei Wei Bai asked again, what is Yu Xiaoyun doing now? The system was silent. Then the host was silent too. Oh, it seemed like the system's monitoring device was broken. Yu Xiaoyun being held hostage completely made all the employees panic. During the transition period of the business, the loss of more than half of the elite leadership was already unstable enough. In the end, the most important backbone was missing. This time, everyone was not doing it. Yu Xiaoyun's woman was not useful. After all, Yu Xiaoyun was the one who fought for this country. Everyone was holding hands and following him, they only respected this one boss. The boss was gone. Any signature was useless, especially when the country had just been established, it was not stable yet, and there were veterans around. Everyone did not recognize anything. They only recognized the person who led them, Yu Xiaoyun. If it was a few more years, when the group was stable, everyone would be at ease. At that time, if someone else was leading, there would not be such a big backlash. But now, Yu Xiaoyun's reputation was at its peak, even if he announced that his woman was in charge. No one would take it seriously. They would just mistakenly think that Yu Xiaoyun had never been in a relationship before and suddenly gave away the country because of love. Everyone laughed and did what they were supposed to do. Who to listen to was still Yu Xiaoyun's words. As for the woman he liked, they just had to give her some respect. It was impossible for them to be obedient. Once Yu Xiaoyun disappeared, the huge network of connections he had would also fall apart. All kinds of schemes, all kinds of resistance. All kinds of threats appeared in front of Wei Wei Bai. Before Wei Wei Bai went back, she had already placed all kinds of threatening things on her desk. For example, blood-stained animals, weapons without bullets, poison daggers, and so on. Wei Wei Bai looked on expressionlessly. She even had the strength to throw those things into the trash can. In the office, her slender figure on the wide desk seemed to be a little fragile. But when she picked up the dead rabbit and threw it into the trash can, there was a sharp tenacity in her eyes. There was a trace of insanity in her beauty. It was as if he wanted to walk all the way to the end and did not intend to care about Yu Xiaoyun's life. As Wei Wei Bai walked out step by step, she suddenly saw a tassel on the spot where Yu Xiaoyun was sitting. It was the purple crystal on the front of her cheongsam. She stopped in her tracks and looked at it for a long time before she reached out to pick it up and put it back on the cheongsam. It was as if she was sentimental. Her fingertips gently stroked it. There was clearly no expression, but there was an indescribable loneliness and pity. Then, Wei Wei Bai straightened her back and went out again. The red light on the office surveillance camera flashed. After Wei Wei Bai walked out, she reconfirmed with the system where there was no surveillance camera and where there was surveillance camera, //. Fast. Chapter 2708. The system said, "Are you afraid that the male lead will check the surveillance cameras in the future?" So, even when there were surveillance cameras, she still did her best to act. Wei Wei Bai said leisurely, "No, he's watching me from behind the cameras." Yu Xiaoyun was a man with strong control and a strong desire for control. How could he not be in control of everything around him at all times? Everything around him, including her. So, there was no way to confirm where Yu Xiaoyun was. So, she could only start to think about whether he was monitoring her. There was a high probability that he was. Especially when the favorability dropped to 73, she was scared when she saw the weapon that someone gave her. Then, the favorability went back to 75. She was sure that the pervert Yu Xiaoyun was spying on her in the dark. And because she was in pain, he was happy. Fuck, this pretentious, shameless, black-hearted little bastard. Not behind the cameras, she walked around the world upside down. Wei Wei Bai heard the system's reminder that there was a camera in front. When she walked around the corner, her expression changed from calm to pain. Of course, this pain was gone in a flash. Even the mist in her eyes was wiped away by her carelessly. This small action was casually captured by the camera. But she didn't seem to know it all. Leaving with her back to the camera, her posture was still straight, filled with an indescribable sense of bleakness and fragility. Temperament was something that could be very helpful at times. Especially when she needed pity, she didn't even need to pretend. Even if she kept a straight face, others would feel that she was very pitiful. It saved her trouble and effort. Wei Wei Bai came to the car. The driver was still waiting. She didn't think much and got into the car directly. In the end, not long after the car started. Suddenly, with a bang, the car flipped over. The driver rebelled. He thought that Wei Wei Bai was a demon. She caused the death of his boss. He wanted to drag Wei Wei Bai down with him. Wei Wei Bai and the system, he had been too pretentious and was caught off guard by a cannonball. He was a little stunned for a moment. Wei Wei Bai, although I know that the driver is dissatisfied with me, I thought he just wanted to threaten me, such as giving me a headless rabbit. The system said, "Come, take the life subsistence allowance. You're lucky, you only hit your head, it's not a big deal." Wei Weibai said, "Wait, why do I feel like my face is bleeding?" The system said, "That's just a small wound, just a scratch. It's fine." Wei Weibai. "I'm disfigured." He felt that a concussion was more frightening than a disfigurement. In the wealthy district of the suburbs, there was an inconspicuous villa that was extremely quiet. On the flat lawn, there was an unusually well-maintained garden, a beautiful fountain, and a commonly seen angel statue. Under the sun, it looked expensive and nothing special. On the second floor, on the huge balcony, a man in black silk pajamas walked barefoot across the smooth, cold marble floor. Yu Xiaoyun's face was pale and haggard. He had a terrible headache. After leaving Wei Weibai, he couldn't even take a nap. Nightmares and darkness seemed to have spread from his dreams to reality. He even occasionally looked into the mirror and saw an evil face appear behind him. It was a projection of him in the dark. Yu Xiaoyun poured a cup of hot tea. Then he turned around, and his slender figure disappeared behind the window glass. He walked into a deeper room. There were surveillance cameras everywhere. // Chapter 2709. In the picture, Wei Weibai lowered her head and stared blankly at the lapel that had fallen on the chair. Her beautiful neck looked even whiter against her black hair. But it also made her look even more slender. She was so fragile that she would break with a pinch. And when she saw the dead animals, the table was full of blood. She was so scared, but she tried her best to hold on. Her pale face and trembling fingers unconsciously looked for his eyes. She was too pitiful. She was also too cute. Yu Xiaoyun lowered his eyes and looked at the tea. In the curling mist, his handsome face looked abnormally hazy and empty. Leaving her. He was not doing well. The only thing that made him happy was that she left him. He was not doing well either. Yu Xiaoyun knew from the beginning that she was impatient and loved and hated him at the same time. This reckless personality was when he forced her to choose. How could she calm down? So the pain that she endured for many years and the crazy desire for power took over. That was why she chose his career and gave up his life. Yu Xiaoyun knew that this was not what she wanted. She liked him, and he could sense it. But so what? What he wanted was not only like, but only. He wanted to get rid of the crazy inferiority complex and the greed for power in her bones. Instead, he wanted to keep this crazy desire in him. That was why Yu Xiaoyun set up this trap. He wanted to let her know that even if she chose power, without his existence, she would not have a good life. She would be in extreme pain and misery. There was no him in this world. She was nothing. She had nothing. If she wanted happiness, then she could only be by his side. Power, everything in the Bai family, anything she was greedy for. Nothing could compare to him, Yu Xiaoyun. What she wanted could only be obtained from him. The man stood in the shadows. His perfect side profile was sickly pale, and there was a sense of coldness and refinement. He slowly lowered his head, his thin lips holding the teacup, and drank the tea in mouthfuls. Like when he drank someone's blood. Especially when he saw her in the corridor, helplessness and sadness flashed in her clear and helpless eyes. The lips that touched the tea slowly curled up, forming a gloomy and happy smile. Just like that, the entire world is your enemy. When she was bullied to the point where she couldn't find anyone to love her, he would be like a savior. He slowly walked out and extended his hand to her. Yu Xiaoyun smiled. At that time, he was probably the only one in her heart. The phone suddenly rang. The crazy darkness on Yu Xiaoyun's face instantly disappeared. He slowly put down the teacup and walked gracefully to the table to answer the call. Then the confidence disappeared from his face. A trace of disbelief flashed through his eyes, as well as the fear of losing control of the situation. Wei Wei Bai got into a car accident. Yu Xiaoyun didn't even change his clothes as he ran out barefooted. The man who had been so confident just now opened the door with trembling fingers. He clearly had someone by her side who could protect her. How could he let her get hurt? Meanwhile, Wei Wei Bai, who was in the hospital, looked like she had nothing to live for. I'm disfigured. The system said, no, it's just a small cut. It's very shallow. Wei Wei Bai was disheartened. I'm disfigured. My flawless skin was cut open with an ugly scar. I feel like I've suffered an unimaginable blow in my life. My only thought is to go upstairs and fly. The system hugged its head. You can do plastic surgery. You'll recover after a little surgery. The. Chapter 27:10. Wei Wei Bai, can you still be considered a beauty after plastic surgery? Natural is the way to go. System, who is the host who wants him to use props to make her the #1 beauty every day? Wei Wei Bai held her face and was about to continue crying about destroying the system. The system was quickly rescued and said, the male lead is here, he is here. It was so excited that it was like winning the lottery. Wei Wei Bai's expression immediately changed. She closed her eyes, pulled the blanket, and went to sleep. The car accident was not tragic enough. She could not teach Yu Xiaoyun, this pretentious bastard, a lesson. When Yu Xiaoyun set the trap, she analyzed him from the beginning to the end. She analyzed him down to his hair. In addition, the system said that there were people around to protect her. There were also people secretly instigating and stirring up emotions to resist and hate her. She guessed step by step until the end. The only reason Wei Wei Bai could think of was that Yu Xiaoyun was torturing the eagle. She was that poor little eagle. And Yu Xiaoyun was the one who wanted to torture her to death. A man who could lurk in the Bai family for so many years like a schizophrenic man must be mentally abnormal. He probably felt that it was too boring to get power. When he saw her bump into him and started to like her, he treated her as a target to conquer. Wei Wei Bai was very familiar with this feeling. She did this every day. To put it bluntly, Yu Xiaoyun just wanted to conquer her and wanted her favorability to 100. That was why he was so pretentious. She wanted 100 because she wanted to go home. There was a healthy, positive, and righteous reason. Yu Xiaoyun wanted 100 favorability because he had lost his purpose in life. If he had control of the power, there was nothing to play with. He was so bored that he went crazy. So he could only play with her and treat her as another game similar to the Bai family's power struggle. He wanted to beat her to completion. So Wei Wei Bai knew that the driver was crazy. When there was a problem, she still chose to get in the car. Of course, she did not know that the driver could be so ruthless. She just got in the car. He stepped on the accelerator to the end and wanted to die with her. But it was exactly what she wanted. If she didn't do this, Yu Xiaoyun would think that everything was in his hands. Wei Wei Bai said, only I can win over others, no one else can. She was the only one who could be unreasonable, and no one else could. Since he wanted to toss and turn. Come on, let's torment each other, be affectionate to each other, and attack each other. The door opened, and Yu Xiaoyun stood quietly at the door. His uneven breathing and rapid heartbeat made him look a little embarrassed. He reached out to hold the door and walked in step by step. On the hospital bed, under the thin blanket, a slender and weak silhouette appeared. Yu Xiaoyun steadied his breathing and quietly walked to the bedside. However, he saw the girl lying on her side, her whole body curled up. The side of her face was covered with thick medical bandages, and the metal plate slid across her cheek. It was said that the position of the metal plate was a few centimeters off. Her face might have been smashed into pieces. At that time, she could treat it as if she was dead. Yu Xiaoyun's heart was pierced by a sharp pain. His fingers trembled as he pulled open some blankets. She was afraid to see other big wounds. The girl's eyelashes trembled, and her brows were tightly furrowed. She seemed to be in great pain. The trace of blood that he had painstakingly nurtured was replaced by a haggard and decadent dark gray color. Her beautiful red lips had also lost all their color. Only a kind of deathly darkness appeared. Yu Xiaoyun's breathing was extremely heavy. He had almost lost her. He was about to let go of the blanket and leave. Wei Wei Bai suddenly opened her eyes, and she looked into his eyes. Yu Xiaoyun was stunned, and his footsteps froze. However, her body suddenly twitched, and a painful expression appeared on her face. A mouthful of blood suddenly spat out from her lips. And read the full article at https://www.sashu.com// and read it on your phone, https://m/sashu.com. Chapter 27:11. This mouthful of blood came too suddenly, and blood overflowed from her grayish-white lips. She stared fixedly at him. That pair of round and beautiful eyes, at this moment, carried a kind of stubbornness that was terrifying to the point of madness as she stared fixedly at Yu Xiaoyun. Yu Xiaoyun's muscles suddenly stiffened, and his mind went blank. He felt that his body was floating. He was slow for a few seconds before he reacted. Something had happened to Wei Wei Bai. He instinctively wanted to turn around and call for help, but the girl on the bed pounced on him. The 4-needle on her wrist flew out with a few drops of blood. Yu Xiaoyun immediately reached out and hugged her tightly. The huge impact made him groan, but his body did not retreat. The person in his arms grabbed his clothes tightly with both hands, and her whole body trembled. She seemed to be unconscious, and the fragile pain on her face was undisguised. She begged in a low voice, "Yu Xiaoyun, don't go." Yu Xiaoyun's hand that was holding her stiffened for a while before gently landing on her back. Her thin back looked so helpless under his palm. His teeth trembled slightly, and he only felt a terrible headache. She was in a car accident. He received more impact than anyone else. He calculated everything and was unwilling to be at a disadvantage. He had to control everything in his hands. He would rather put her in danger than let her suffer. In the end, he realized that he was not a god. He had calculated everything, but she could have died because of some inconspicuous mistake. He did not even include the driver in his plan. However, when she was forced to betray her family, he was bribed by his opponent, who planned to murder her, causing the entire group to be in complete chaos. If it wasn't for his show that made too many people believe it, those people wouldn't have fallen out so quickly. They wouldn't have bribed the driver to kill her. He touched the ends of her hair with his fingers. Her black hair was unusually messy, and had lost its silky luster. His fingertips touched the skin on her neck. There were scratch marks, and the fine wounds on her fair skin was almost transparent. It was a shocking sight. Yu Xiaoyun gritted his teeth and carried her up horizontally. Wei Wei Bai seemed to be frightened. She grabbed his clothes with both hands and buried her head in his chest. It was like a kitten that had lost its home and was clinging to its last hope. She was worried that she would be abandoned. Yu Xiaoyun couldn't bear to put her down. He could only walk to the table and ring the bell to call the nurses and doctors. Her fingers kept trembling, and the mouthful of blood from earlier was still on the bedding. It had already begun to dry up and become deeper. Yu Xiaoyun originally wanted her to let go of him. He was worried about her physical condition. However, he found that his fingertips were wet with cold sweat. Yu Xiaoyun stared blankly at the cold sweat on her fingers. Only then did she realize that her body was trembling uncontrollably. It was not because of excitement. Instead, it was some sort of uncontrollable excessive convulsion. Yu Xiaoyun touched her hair with his fingers and saw that her forehead was full of fine water droplets. He finally became anxious. Wei Wei, let go of me. The doctor is here. Wei Wei Bai couldn't hear him at all. Her eyes were in a trance. He wasn't really awake. It seemed to be grabbing at him instinctively. But she didn't dare to raise her head. She seemed to be afraid of something. When the doctor and nurse rushed in, they saw a strange scene. Yu Xiaoyun, who was wearing messy home clothes, was standing by the bed with their patient in his arms. The two of them seemed to have a strange sense of tragedy. Yu Xiaoyun suddenly raised his eyes. The fragile look in his eyes disappeared in the blink of an eye and was replaced by a cold strength. The download address is at https://www.sashu.com. Chapter 27:12. He shouted coldly. What are you waiting for? With this order, the doctor came over to see the patient. However, he found that this position was not easy to treat. Yu Xiaoyun also knew that Wei Wei Bai was holding on to him too tightly. Their skin was only covered by a thin layer of clothes. However, they could clearly feel each other's temperature. And he could feel that her skin was unusually cold. Yu Xiaoyun slowly took a deep breath. He felt that the air in his throat and windpipe was boiling hot. His temples were still in pain. Then he heard his calm voice instruct, "Tranquilizer." She seemed to be in a nightmare. Something was completely wrong. Wei Wei Bai, who was injected with a tranquilizer, finally felt weak in her hands and feet. When she was placed on the bed by Yu Xiaoyun, she seemed to have finally woken up for a moment. Her eyes were red. Yu Xiaoyun, you're not dead. The bitterness and fragility in her tone were moving. Yu Xiaoyun froze for a moment. Then, he put her hand flat as if nothing had happened and pulled the blanket over to cover her. Then, he took out a clean handkerchief and gently wiped her lips. The nurse began to put an intravenous drip on her wrist again and treat her small wounds. The doctor also began to check the medical equipment, intending to re-examine Wei Wei Bai. The surroundings were unusually messy. Only this man's action of wiping her blood was meticulous and gentle. It was as if everyone was a frozen background, and only he was the quietest world. Yu Xiaoyun took a deep breath and finally suppressed his trembling body. He said in a low voice, "I'm not dead. Didn't the other party say that they would kill me in 3 days?" The sobriety in Bai Weiwei's eyes was unstable. Most of her face was covered with medical bandages, making her 2 bloodshot eyes look even bigger. They were so big that it was frightening and pitiful. Her lips trembled. "I thought I had given up on you." In other words, 3 days were up. She would not save him either. Yu Xiaoyun listened to her gradually softening voice, but he was still calm. "Well, let's give up." When he said this, his tone was as thin as a thread, as if he was finally telling the truth in a low voice. "Even I am about to give up on myself." Wei Wei Bai didn't seem to hear him. Even Yu Xiaoyun felt that he was speaking with his lips, almost silently. He would never say such depressing words. He didn't allow himself to say it either. Even though he knew that he already had 1 foot on the cliff. The mental scars left behind since childhood had never been better. By this year, the situation had deteriorated to the point of collapse. It didn't collapse. It was just that she was holding on. But he saw her as his only salvation, so he wanted to control everything about her more and more. He didn't allow her to be distracted by him at all. He would not allow her to have other pursuits in her heart. It didn't matter when he was sentimental and fond of her. But when he really started to care about her, he shifted all his attention to her. His demands on her were starting to become heavier. It was so heavy that it was morbid. Yu Xiaoyun's expression was calm and gentle, and no other emotions could be seen. He finished wiping off the blood and watched her slowly close her eyes. Her long eyelashes drooped pitifully, casting a thick shadow. It made her even more haggard. Yu Xiaoyun felt that she clearly had a vicious and crazy side to her, but why did she look so easy to bully? Why did she make people feel that she couldn't do bad things? It wasn't accurate to say that one's appearance came from one's heart. Regardless of whether it was on him, a person who looked like a Buddhist to others. //fast // The download address is at https://www.sashu.com. Fast the is at https://m.sashu.com/fast. Chapter 27:13. And it was on a weak and helpless little girl like her. Wei Wei Bai suddenly opened her eyes with great effort and held his palm with weak fingers. The man's palm was actually covered in sultry sweat. It seemed to have been squeezed out by him tightly. Her voice was hoarse. I want you. Yu Xiaoyun looked at her without saying a word, as if he couldn't react in time. Wei Wei Bai felt a lump in her throat. Her voice trembled, and she almost begged him to say something domineering. I want you, Yu Xiaoyun. I want you to live. I want you to love me. You're not allowed to leave me. These words were too humble. She said it was all in one throw. In such a weak voice, in such a tragic tone. It was like the words of a person who was in extreme despair and had lost everything, using the last bit of her voice to say. She wanted him. An extremely willful request. But she said it while crying. Yu Xiaoyun allowed her to hold his hand. Slowly, her hand lost its strength. Her eyelashes finally fell, and the sound of her breathing could be heard faintly. In Yu Xiaoyun's palm, her fingertips began to slide. Finally, he moved his fingers and gently closed them, gathering her fingers in his palm. Then he stood up silently, lowered his head, and stretched out his other hand. Under the disapproving eyes of the doctor and nurse, but they didn't dare to protest, he removed the bandage on her face. The wound was very scary. It had just been applied with medicine, so it was green and red. One could even see the white flesh under the skin. He thought of the car accident, where she had been on the brink of death. There was also the iron plate that had slid across her cheek, and she had almost been killed. Compared to life, this wound was actually not serious. But to her, it was indeed a fatal wound. Yu Xiaoyun slowly suppressed the discomfort in his chest and asked in a low voice, "Can it not leave a scar?" The doctor hesitated and replied, "You have to use cosmetic surgery." In other words, the usual treatment method couldn't heal her wound. She could only use plastic surgery. The current plastic surgery technology was extremely advanced, and the skin graft repair could still be achieved without scars. Yu Xiaoyun said, "Then use it." She didn't like this wound. No woman would like it. Yu Xiaoyun looked at her wound and was stunned for a long time before he asked the doctor to change the dressing. He sat there quietly. He allowed the doctor to examine him, change his dressing, and change the drip bottle again. The data on the instrument slowly returned to normal. In the end, the doctor said, she was seriously injured in the car accident last time. Now that she's in another car accident, it's going to take a lot of effort for her body to recover. These words were actually very harsh. Once the foundation of one's body was not good, one would have to take good care of the weak and sickly. Otherwise, he wouldn't have lived a long life. Yu Xiaoyun acted as if he didn't hear it. He just calmly asked, "Why did you vomit blood?" The doctor said, "The internal organs are fragile, and the stress is attacking the heart. It's caused by a huge fluctuation of emotions. The patient can't be too emotional before he recovers." "Yu Xiaoyun, did you find any other problems?" The doctor shook his head. "No, the rest are the sequelae of the car accident. The patient is out of danger now. The rest is just hard work." What he meant was whether the patient could recover or not. Would it become a medicine jar in the future? It all depended on how much the patient's family valued her during this period of time and whether they could serve her well. Otherwise, the slightest bit of carelessness would leave behind a permanent illness, which would be troublesome in the future. Yu Xiaoyun nodded, indicating that he understood. The doctor and the nurse tidied up and left. The bodyguards and a department manager who followed at the door stood trembling with fear. The comma. Chapter 27:14. Yu Xiaoyun sat motionless, his fingers intertwined with her hand. His sitting posture, even his back, was a little bent, giving him a decadent feeling. "I'll come back to collect the punishment later. First, detain everyone related to the driver and wait for me to deal with them." After saying that, he paused and said, "Close the door." The bodyguards immediately closed the door and left a few to guard. The rest went to do things. The ward was very quiet. Only the sound of the equipment and the girl's steady breathing could be heard. There was also the sound of his rapid heartbeat. Yu Xiaoyun finally exhaled slowly. His face was unusually pale, and his eyes were trembling. Everything was arranged. He was like a patient who had survived a disaster and finally dared to show his weakness. "It's good that you're fine," he said in a low voice with a trace of helplessness and sadness. "I really don't have a way out." Yu Xiaoyun thought of his nightmare. It wasn't a nightmare. It was reality. When he killed his only friend in the Bai family and slowly put himself in the position of the dangerous, elegant, and seemingly beautiful young master of a big family. That weak version of himself had died in his own hands. But his nature didn't let him go. He always remembered his original home. Although his father was the #1 lackey of the Bai family, he loved his family very much. To give him a normal childhood. He hid all of his darkness so that he could follow his mother and live as carefree as an ordinary child. And that normal childhood became a mountain that crushed his spirit. If he had been dark from the beginning, he wouldn't have felt guilty or blamed himself. He wouldn't have hated his darkness and madness. But his childhood was too beautiful and bright. This light illuminated him, who had used all kinds of despicable means to survive, to an abnormally hateful appearance. Instead of saying that he destroyed everything in the Bai family, he was taking revenge. It was better to say that he was destroying those who had witnessed him, like a stray dog, using all kinds of means to survive. Yu Xiaoyun slowly revealed a pale smile. "I hate myself." This was his illness. It went deep into his bone marrow and was beyond cure. "After meeting you, I saw the light of redemption." He slowly lowered his head and buried himself in her slightly cold neck. "Just like a child," he muttered in a low voice, feeling extremely wronged. "I also want everything of yours, because a person like me is not worthy of anyone's love. If I want someone to love me, I can only use tricks, I can only snatch." Yu Xiaoyun's breath was close to her scarred skin. He felt the pulse in her neck that was still alive. That fragile heartbeat made her tremble. It seemed to be his only living consciousness. His fingers trembled as he clutched the sleeve of her arm. It was as crazy as when she grabbed his clothes. But he couldn't bear to touch her arm for fear of hurting her. "Thank you." His breathing paused, and his tears fell into the depths of her shoulder, wetting her long hair. Choose me. He had planned and schemed, but all he wanted was one person. She just wanted him. Even if he was not elegant, not beautiful, and extremely ugly. She still wanted him. Yu Xiaoyun quietly shed tears. When she was asleep, he revealed all of his weakness and inferiority. The lonely man didn't even dare to show such a pathetic side when she was awake. He was worried that all she wanted was the high and mighty him. Instead of being so incompetent and weak at this very moment. Even so, when he heard her say that he was the one she wanted, his heart still throbbed fiercely. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 89. To facilitate your next reading, you can click on the Chapter 27:15. Wei Wei Bai was in a daze. Yu Xiaoyun was afraid that she would wake up, so he injected a little too much tranquilizer. Her limbs were weak, as if she was floating in the clouds. She opened her eyes with great effort and instinctively reached out to rub her temples because her head hurt a little. But before her fingers could fall, they were grasped by another warm hand. It was a little hard, but she didn't feel any pain. Wei Wei Bai's eyelashes trembled before she slowly opened her eyes. Wei Wei Bai, whose vision was a little out of focus, turned her face to the side and only saw a blurry figure beside the bed. She blinked hard and finally saw it clearly. It was Yu Xiaoyun. The man had already changed his clothes. The neat black suit made his figure even more slender and exquisite. His handsome and elegant face was calm and gentle under the white light. He put her fingers under the blanket as if he didn't care. He didn't let her fingers touch her face. It's cold. Don't catch a cold. After saying that, he fed her water. The man casually glanced at the bandage on her face for half a second. Then, as if nothing had happened, he supported her back and slowly fed the girl the warm water in his arms. Her figure was too thin. She was already as slender as a child, but now her health was taken away by the accident. It took her so much effort to cultivate and take away her delicate appearance. It made her more like a lifeless paper person, with a frightening sense of fragility. Yu Xiaoyun lowered his eyes. There were countless emotions in his eyes, but he didn't reveal any of them. Instead, he was like before, still with a little strength and elegance, controlling everything about her. Wei Wei Bai was a little confused. She looked at him blankly. She even drank the water obediently. But her eyes didn't move as she looked at him. Yu Xiaoyun knew what she was thinking, but he didn't say anything. After drinking the water, Yu Xiaoyun didn't let go of her. Instead, he sat on the bed and let her nestle in his arms obediently. His fingers were incomparably gentle as they caressed her somewhat dry long hair. His fingertips were filled with an incomparably tender strength. Wei Wei Bai froze and didn't move. Yu Xiaoyun. She finally opened her mouth. Her voice was still hoarse due to her injuries and excessive sleep. In the depths of his throat, one could even hear a few weak trembling sounds. Are you all right? She saw him being taken away with her own eyes. But when she was in a car accident, she saw him appear. Wei Wei Bai seemed to have thought of something. Her eyes were filled with bewilderment and doubt. She was never stupid. However, he was more like an ostrich when it came to this matter. He asked cautiously. Yu Xiaoyun silently put down the glass of water, then reached out and gently pressed her temples. The gentle force was unusually comfortable. Wei Wei Bai's frown finally eased a little. An indescribable silence spread between the two of them. For a moment, neither of them dared to break the silence. Finally, Yu Xiaoyun said, "It's fake. I thought you liked me, so I set up a fake scheme to get you to reopen the sea navigation project. As long as the project is reopened, my people need to appear. He was the one who initiated the project. Although he could solve many things by himself. But more of the project branches were headed by Qin Shan, and the junior leaders under him were in charge of handling them. Wei Wei Bai listened quietly. She wasn't hysterical or angry. She was like a pitiful child, curled up in his arms and listened blankly. At this point, Yu Xiaoyun paused and then chuckled softly. Unfortunately, you prefer my money or the career that I've built. Chapter 27:16. His tone was indifferent. It was so relaxed that it was as if he was talking about what to eat for lunch. He even had the leisure to gently kiss her forehead. If you liked someone, you would yearn to hug her, kiss her, and love her. This was human nature's instinctive closeness to anything that one loved to the bone. Yu Xiaoyun had always resisted this kind of instinctive control, but he couldn't resist her and was willing to do it. Wei Wei Bai let him kiss her in a daze. A trace of trembling, fragility, and complicated pain appeared in her eyes. She pursed her lips. Don't think that I will. I will give you the person, give you. Yu Xiaoyun could almost taste the bitterness in her words, as well as that uncontrollable sense of fragility. She was already so weak. She still had to use such a fragile shell to support her self-esteem. Yu Xiaoyun sighed, let go of her, and put her on the bed. Wei Wei Bai's panicked face was revealed. He got up and was about to leave. The girl behind him was like a cat. She suddenly pounced on him and grabbed his waist tightly with both hands. She said in horror, "Where are you going? Don't you want me anymore? Is it because I didn't pass your test? Do you hate me?" These words were too humble and panicky. Yu Xiaoyun, who was about to pick up the thermos and feed Wei Wei Bai, froze. She was pressed against his back. Because they were too close, he could feel her body trembling non-stop. She was really afraid. He was going to leave. Yu Xiaoyun felt as if something was stuck in his throat, and he felt extremely uncomfortable. His manipulation, planning, and all kinds of coldly watching cruelty. He had forced her to the edge of a cliff. With just a gentle push, he could drive her crazy. Yu Xiaoyun felt that he was extremely ridiculous. Why didn't he see how weak and helpless the softness in the depths of her heart was? He felt that he was testing her and forcing her. It was like a cold killer. This was not love. His sick desire and possessiveness were not love for her. Instead, he was forcing her to fall into hell with him. It was more like a kind of crazy hatred. Hating her had made him like her and turned him into a lunatic who was worried about his gains and losses. He could only chase after her everything. Yu Xiaoyun's breathing paused for a long time before he finally suppressed his sour expression. He was just about to comfort her. However, he heard her whisper, "Yu Xiaoyun, I love you." Yu Xiaoyun was silent and stood there in a daze. She repeated softly, "I've loved you for a long, long time." Everything seemed like an unbelievable dream. Yu Xiaoyun didn't even know what he was feeling because his heart was surging with emotions. She was the only one who loved him. This thought continued to eat away at his everything. Her voice reverberated in his body. She liked him, he knew. But he had never thought that he would hear her say that she loved him with his own ears. She begged, "I'll return them to you. I didn't hurt your subordinates. I was afraid that you would be angry. I took good care of them. Please don't be angry with me." Yu Xiaoyun's nose was a little sour. He blinked, and his eyes began to turn red. Then he said in a low voice, "No, I'm not angry." He would never be able to be angry with her. He was angry at himself for being too harsh and cruel to her. He was sick, so he was like a madman and treated her badly. Wei Wei Bai hugged his waist and pressed the side of her face against his back muscles. A happy smile appeared on her pale face. It's good that you're not angry. Then I'll return your business and company to you. I didn't want them in the first place. If you want to start the sea navigation project, then start it. I don't care. She said it casually. Chapter 27:17. She had really given up everything. She might have forgotten what she muttered to herself in a daze before she was injected with the tranquilizer. She wanted him. Yu Xiaoyun thought that those were the most beautiful words. But he didn't expect that she didn't say it because she was confused. She really chose to want him so seriously. And she gave up everything that she had painstakingly schemed and endured for so many years to get in exchange for him. Yu Xiaoyun saw the dark shadow in front of him, the other self that emerged from the twisted and divided spirit in his heart, slowly fading away. A heart of self-loathing. It was actually filled by her. If he didn't love himself, gave up on himself, and hated himself, the only way to heal was the love of another person for him. Yu Xiaoyun's fingers loosened with some difficulty, and blood appeared in his palm under his fingernails. His fingertips pierced his skin too hard. He didn't feel pain, only joy. Yu Xiaoyun lowered his head and let her hug him. His short black hair scattered down and covered his red eyes. The dark night. The cold light. His thin lips finally couldn't help but curve up. Then he reached out and gently pulled away her 10 fingers that were crossed in front of his waist, almost piously. He turned around and squatted down gently, almost kneeling on the ground with one knee. Then he raised his chin, revealing his white jade-like face and his pair of deeply affectionate eyes. Wei Wei Bai sat on the blanket in a daze. Her expression was very ugly, and her fingers were still trembling. Yu Xiaoyun held her hands and pressed them to his lips. Wei Wei, his voice was even indifferent. Thank you. But it was so gentle that it moved people. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 93. Yu Xiaoyun held her fingers tightly, and his eyes curved. I love you too. Her choppy words were a little stuttering. The man seemed a little embarrassed. He raised his head and pulled her hard. Wei Wei Bai didn't have the strength to resist and fell into his prepared embrace. A gentle embrace, a strong heartbeat. Yu Xiaoyun lowered his head and kissed her deeply. Wei Wei Bai seemed to be scared. She could only curl up and not dare to move as he hugged her. A long time later, she heard him say faintly, "Close your eyes if you're tired." Wei Wei Bai's eyelashes fluttered. The man continued in a hoarse voice, "May I continue?" She moved her lips and said, I can't. I know. She sounded a little disappointed. But the next sentence was, "What I said was, continue kissing you." Wei Wei Bai's lips moved slightly, and she was about to say something. But it was too late. The man stroked her hair and hugged her tighter. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 95. Chen Shan felt like he was recuperating with a bunch of rough men. It was especially tiring. Although everyone was playing cards in the hospital, it was noisy, and no one cared about eating hot pot. But he always felt that it was strange to live like a muddle-headed life. He seemed to have forgotten something. Occasionally, when they were recuperating from their injuries, they would suddenly pull out a white cloth and start a meeting. But after the meeting, he would wonder what he was doing. They seemed to have lost some of their memories due to the aftermath of the car accident. When the doctor said that she could leave the hospital, they collectively stood at the door in a row in hospital gowns. A cold wind blew. The hospital was still the same hospital. But this person was no longer the same person. The doctor was wrong, the nurse was wrong, and even the stray cats at the door was wrong. Because there was no trash can at the entrance of their hospital, and there would be no stray cats and dogs. Slash. Chapter 27:18. It was especially clean. It was so clean that it was not normal. Everyone was suddenly jolted awake. They suddenly realized who they were, what they were doing, and the sequelae were all gone. Then, under Qin Shan's lead, everyone fled as if they had seen a ghost. When they finally ran back to the Bai family's mansion. At the entrance of the Bai family's mansion, which had already changed its surname, the house number was still Bai. Qin Shan and his brothers entered the house trembling with fear. They almost ran away. It was fine if there were no guards, but the mansion was empty, almost like a haunted house. It was not easy for them to run to the Love Garden, intending to look for their boss. In the end, there was a pool of dead lotuses, as well as all kinds of flowers, plants, and trees that grew horizontally. The Love Garden had become an extremely barren, lush, and wild paradise that almost drowned Yu Xiaoyun's house. Qin Shan had just squeezed across the small bridge with a group of brothers in hospital clothes. They saw a more normal scene. Yu Xiaoyun was standing at the door, and Wei Wei Bai was sitting in his arms, leaning against him. The pitiful girl seemed to have become even thinner and weaker. She cowered a little and reached out to cover her face. "It's ugly." She tried very hard to hide. However, Yu Xiaoyun was very calm and gentle. He used a stubborn action to trap her and stared at her bandaged face. His eyes were unusually calm. "The scar is very easy to remove. Don't touch it with your hands, and don't touch it with water. It will heal." Then, Yu Xiaoyun continued his actions. He used a sandalwood comb to continue combing her messy long hair. Because of the lack of nutrition, she had lost too much blood after the car accident. There were piles of pills to be taken, so it was inevitable that there would be some sequelae. For example, her beautiful long hair began to lose its luster and even began to knot. Wei Wei Bai even wanted to cut her with scissors. However, Yu Xiaoyun stopped her and personally took care of her long hair. He used warm water to wash her hair with Chinese medicine, then dried it with the lightest wind. Then, he carried her to the door to bask in the sun. He used a sandalwood comb to slowly comb her hair. There was also essential oil for hair care beside it. After combing her hair, he would use these to massage her hair. When the man was serious, he was frighteningly gentle and meticulous. When they were in the hospital, Yu Xiaoyun didn't let her talk about work. He didn't plan to talk about taking back those properties either. Instead, he focused on letting her recuperate. This car accident was related to the previous one, which caused his body to be weak. However, it was not as serious as the previous car accident. The most serious wound was the one on his face. Therefore, after recuperating for nearly 2 weeks, Yu Xiaoyun agreed to take her out of the hospital. Nothing went well in the hospital. Once he was sure that she needed to recuperate, he would bring her home to personally watch over her and take care of her. Yu Xiaoyun's movements were serious and focused. He didn't even look at his subordinate who was standing behind a pile of weeds. He was not surprised at all by their sudden appearance. Wei Wei Bai leaned against him and said sadly, "If I become ugly, you won't want me anymore." Yu Xiaoyun's fingers paused for a moment before returning to normal and continuing to comb her hair. Wei Wei Bai said in self-loathing, "You haven't seen my wound." Yu Xiaoyun said indifferently, "Yes, I was the one who changed the dressing when you were asleep." Wei Wei Bai was stunned. The man had already lowered his head and kissed her bandage. "All right, don't think too much. It's just a scar. How can I not want you?" After he said that, he smiled. Wei Wei Bai pursed her lips. She didn't believe him, but she didn't continue to argue. It was as if this question had been asked many times. Yu Xiaoyun's technique was too comfortable. Bai Weiwei leaned against him before falling asleep. He continued to massage her hair unhurriedly. When the wind started to blow, Yu Xiaoyun carried her back to the house. Qin Shan and the rest of the big brothers squatted in the grass. They were about to turn into grass. Finally, Yu Xiaoyun came out of the door. His elegant figure quietly came to the grass. She let you guys come back. Qin Shan and the rest of the people had strange doubts. After all, they had just run out of a strange hospital. When they came back, they saw such a strange scene. Everyone found it strange. Yu Xiaoyun reached out and rolled up his sleeves unhurriedly. You came back just in time. Are your wounds all healed? Qin Shan was immediately moved and nodded immediately. They're all healed. Everyone is fine. The boss's concern warmed his heart. Yu Xiaoyun nodded. That's good. Then let's start cleaning up the courtyard. You guys go and take out all the lotus in the pond first. After he finished speaking, he paused and thought of something. Oh right, remember to take out the lotus roots carefully. Tonight, I'm going to make lotus root and pork ribs soup for Weiwei to replenish her blood and qi. Qin Shan and the rest of the brothers, /crossover system, Adonis, come here and read the full article at https://www.sashu.com. Download Transmigration system, Adonis, come here and read this on your phone, https://m/sashu.com. The comma. Chapter 27:19. After Qin Shan and the others returned, the big house finally had some life. Otherwise, there would be only Yu Xiaoyun, who was about to become a deity, left in this place. There was also Weiwei Bai, who was as obedient as a kitten. The two of them couldn't make any noise. They were both gentle and weak. Qin Shan and the others felt that it was very quiet. Yu Xiaoyun also wanted to make this place livelier, but Weiwei Bai didn't say anything. He didn't want to call those servants back. He was afraid that her fragile mind would think too much and see those servants. He would think of the scene where the two of them turned against each other. It was good that Qin Shan came back. Although he was rough, he still had thoughts. So Yu Xiaoyun let them eat hot pot. Weiwei Bai was still on a diet and couldn't eat. She could only eat the light food that Yu Xiaoyun made for her. The food was unexpectedly delicious for a person who found learning to be easy. Yu Xiaoyun put in a lot of effort to learn cooking, so it was very easy to capture Weiwei Bai's stomach. When he saw the girl use a white porcelain spoon to scoop up the soup he made and drink it sip by sip, it was rare to experience a sense of accomplishment that was different from the success of his career. It was another kind of peaceful and beautiful satisfaction. On the large round table, Qin Shan and a dozen or so senior team leaders who had just recovered were scooping meatballs and eating lamb strips. The fragrance curled up in the smoke. Weiwei Bai looked enviously at Qin Shan, the meat in his hand. Then she continued to eat her own plain soup. There was no other way. Her body was almost ruined by the car accident. She was worried that she would die before she completed the task because she was too weak. She could only eat the food that Yu Xiaoyun made. Yu Xiaoyun sat opposite her and was picking food for her. They had their own table, a small square table. It was placed not far from the round table. Behind them was the lotus pond that could be seen through the open window. The fallen lotus flowers in the pond had been cleaned up. The moonlight reflected on it was exceptionally beautiful. Weiwei Bai suddenly shook the spoon in her hand. She frowned and pursed her lips, not saying anything. Yu Xiaoyun held her hand and took her spoon. "Is your arm numb again?" he asked in detail. Weiwei Bai's voice was extremely calm. "I'm fine." However, Yu Xiaoyun pinched her wrist with his fingers and rubbed it bit by bit. He loosened her stiff arms. He lowered his head and massaged her seriously. She was already very familiar with this action. After all, during this period of time when her blood was blocked, she would always feel numb in her shoulders. He could even pinch the right amount of force to make her feel comfortable. Wei Wei Bai looked at him silently. Her lips moved, but in the end, she lowered her eyes and didn't say anything. Yu Xiaoyun seemed to be completely unaware of how much tenderness and humility his actions carried. After the meal. Only then did Yu Xiaoyun tell Qin Shan about the transfer of assets. Qin Shan, then, he suddenly asked, "What's going on? Are you being coerced? Or did someone blackmail you?" Yu Xiaoyun thought for a moment, then turned around to look for Wei Wei Bai. He saw her walking slowly and seriously while supporting herself against the wall not far away. The doctor told her to do some light movements. Therefore, after she was full, she would hold on to the wall like a child learning to walk. Step by step, she would seriously count her steps as she walked around the wall. It was cold outside, and he couldn't bear to let her go out for a walk. Because of the importance he attached to her body, Yu Xiaoyun sometimes felt that he was restraining her too much. Yu Xiaoyun's voice was faint, and there was only the shadow of that girl in his gentle eyes. "Yes, it's something that can be used against you?" Qin Shan asked anxiously, and his tone was unfriendly. "What do you mean?" Comma. Chapter 27:20. The transfer of business was not a small matter. He felt that the sky had fallen when the company changed. After all, they had followed Yu Xiaoyun to build the business and had already recognized Yu Xiaoyun. Wasn't it a joke to change someone else? Yu Xiaoyun turned his face and said casually, "My heart." Qin Shan, ? Yu Xiaoyun couldn't help but laugh. "I think it's worth it to use everything I have to exchange for her happiness." Qin Shan, he had once thought that his boss was going to become an immortal. He wished that he could find a wife to control him as soon as possible. Only now did he know that his boss had indeed become an immortal. A love immortal. Either he didn't look for one, or he had to be 30 years old with a pure look on his face. In the end, when he finally found one, he found such a young one. However, men were all like this. Who didn't want to find a young, old man who abandoned his chaff to marry a young girl? Of course, he despised this kind of thing very much. Qin Shan was still happy that although Yu Xiaoyun found a young one, he still found one after all. He should be more human. In the end, he wasn't human. It was a business that he had fought so hard to build. It was a company that he had worked so hard to transform. Just like that, this old lover of the Bai family gave it to his little girl. Had Yu Xiaoyun never seen the world and never been in a relationship? Who would give away 90% of their net worth just because they were in a relationship? The remaining 10% was probably in danger. Because he saw the supplements that Yu Xiaoyun bought for Wei Wei Bai. It was simply too expensive. Qin Shan felt that Yu Xiaoyun couldn't possibly ask Wei Wei Bai for money. Therefore, he used the remaining money from his business to raise such a precious little cutie. This was too expensive. He hadn't even married her yet, and he was already bankrupt. Qin Shan was stunned and speechless for a moment. His mind was blank. He felt that he might as well have died in a car accident on the spot. He wouldn't have seen Yu Xiaoyun like Emperor Ming of the Tang dynasty, who wanted a beauty and gave up his business. Qin Shan rubbed his face with his hand in despair and cried, "So, are you telling me that we're going to lose our jobs?" They only recognized Yu Xiaoyun. Wei Wei Bai and the rest did not acknowledge her. Yu Xiaoyun was already poor, how could they have the nerve to follow the new owner to eat and drink well? This was too unbrotherly. Yu Xiaoyun's attitude was sloppy, and his eyes kept following Wei Wei by. He treated Qin Shan indifferently. No, she's not used to the company's operations. She's not in good health and loves to work. Moreover, having too much self-esteem leads to extreme inferiority and sensitivity. In the future, you have to make the document simple and easy to understand. Try to reduce the number of meetings and time as much as possible. Qin Shan, also, when you're done, leave her with the easiest way to clean up the mess. Let her feel that she's the one who did it well. That way, she'll feel happier. Qin Shan looked at Yu Xiaoyun, ignoring Yu Xiaoyun's calm expression as he continued to give orders. She can do whatever she wants. If the company collapses, you can come to me. I'll clean up the mess for her. Qin Shan went from despair to numbness. In the end, he was expressionless. If you say so. You can do whatever you want. This was the first time he had seen his authority taken away. He could even be in charge of after-sales and be so happy. Qin Shan felt blood churning in his chest. He wanted to spit it out, but he couldn't. He only felt that his life was filled with the taste of despair. His boss was completely done for because of a girl. And he didn't just send himself to his doorstep. Chapter 27-21. Even their group of brothers were sent to be coolies. Yu Xiaoyun finally concluded calmly, you guys have to work harder. You have to rush to do all the hardest and most difficult things. You have to make her feel that starting a company is just like playing. She earned the money because she was smart, and you guys are useless if you lose money. I'm just a retired old man. When you want to complain to me, you can send me an email. At this point, he reminded them worriedly, don't let her know the cruelty of society. I have to protect her. Qin Shan, you have to protect her. Who will protect their group of brothers? They had never seen their boss in a relationship like this. They had no fucking dignity, did they? Yu Xiaoyun suddenly looked up faintly. That pair of incomparably gentle eyes turned cold and calm. Do you understand? Qin Shan immediately clenched his fists and said seriously, I understand. I will do this difficult task well. Yu Xiaoyun, lower your voice. Qin Shan immediately pursed his lips and said softly, yes, boss. Yu Xiaoyun, she will be your boss in the future. Qin Shan looked at the young girl who was slowly walking forward with small steps. The tail of the girl's long hair was also swaying. She looked so cute. If he punched her, she would probably cry like a flower. In the end, Qin Shan helplessly covered his face. Yes, boss Wei Wei. Yu Xiaoyun nodded. This kid was worth teaching. Then he got up and walked a few steps forward to the girl who was walking seriously. He picked her up easily. Time's up. You're not allowed to leave. If you continue to walk, you'll hurt yourself. Wei Wei Bai frowned. I think I'm okay. Yu Xiaoyun, I don't think so. Wei Wei Bai wanted to protest. Yu Xiaoyun suddenly looked dejected. Is it because I have nothing now that you don't even want to hear my concern? Wei Wei Bai, Yu Xiaoyun turned back again. His gentle gaze now looked at Qin Shan and the others with indescribable coldness. Qin Shan and the others immediately stood up. Then we'll take our leave. You guys have a good rest. Yu Xiaoyun looked at Qin Shan calmly. It seemed to be reminding him of something. Qin Shan looked at Wei Wei Bai, who was in his arms. The young girl's delicate and innocent appearance and her pair of pure eyes made her look pitiful and unthreatening. Was this their new boss? Qin Shan moved his mouth, but he felt as if his mouth was glued shut by superglue. It was extremely painful to open his mouth. In the end, he stared at Yu Xiaoyun's murderous eyes, lowered his head and shouted, boss, sister-in-law, will be leaving first. Goodbye. Everyone shouted, boss, sister-in-law, have a good rest. Yu Xiaoyun was a little stunned. When he came back to his senses, he did not say anything. Everyone rolled back one by one. The room returned to its tranquil and warm atmosphere. Wei Wei Bai tugged at his clothes. Her face was a little red as she mumbled, whose sister-in-law? A gentle smile appeared on Yu Xiaoyun's stunned face. Whatever. Wei Wei Bai didn't know how to react. He seemed to have noticed her confusion. Yu Xiaoyun carried her into the room and whispered to her softly. It's fine if you want to be the boss. I'll be the sister-in-law. The corner of Wei Wei Bai's eyes twitched. She had seen many thick-skinned people. But they were so thick-skinned that they looked so elegant and calm. No. During this period of time, Wei Wei Bai's understanding of the realm of thick-skinned people had been refreshed again. She felt that she could learn from Yu Xiaoyun in the future. There was no end to acting, and she had to constantly learn and deepen her lifelong career. Chapter 27-22. Therefore, Wei Wei Bai also smiled calmly. Yes, sister-in-law. Yu Xiaoyun thought for a moment and put her on the bed. Then he corrected her, that's not how you address our relationship. Wei Wei Bai pursed her lips and didn't say anything. She also fell for his trick. After all, he would definitely call her husband next. Yu Xiaoyun would definitely be able to call her by such a mushy name. He could even call her his wife. Yu Xiaoyun didn't continue to be disgusted. He turned around and came in with a foot bath. It was filled with warm Chinese medicine. He held Wei Wei Bai's feet and carefully massaged her feet, so that the blood in her feet would flow smoothly and the coldness in her hands and feet would be relieved a little. Wei Wei Bai stared at his head. His soft and messy hair was stuck to his fair forehead. The man's appearance was still young and beautiful. However, there was an incomparably silent elegance. This was a temperament that a teenage boy couldn't have. He had always lived a noble life and lived a meticulous life. But he didn't expect that he would roll up his sleeves, cook, and wash someone's feet. Yu Xiaoyun didn't feel that he had sacrificed anything. But he knew Wei Wei Bai's psychological burden. Her toes were still trembling, and she wanted to escape. When he hugged her, she always turned her face to the side to avoid him. She didn't want him to see the injured side of her face. Yu Xiaoyun knew that this was a psychological problem, unless she recovered. Otherwise, she would still be concerned about her appearance. No one would be so indifferent to their disfigurement. But her physical condition didn't allow her to undergo surgery. She might have to endure for another year or two to make sure that her physical condition could recover before she could operate on her again. Otherwise, Yu Xiaoyun couldn't bear for her to take any risks. After washing her feet, Wei Wei Bai curled up in the warm blanket. She turned her body to face him. Yu Xiaoyun turned off the lights. After she was injured, she had been sleeping with the lights off. There was no mirror at home, so she didn't want to face herself. Yu Xiaoyun let her be, but no matter what she wanted to do or how she broke down. She really wanted to be alone. He didn't leave, didn't fight back when she hit him, and didn't talk back when she scolded him. She couldn't bear to hit him anyway. Yu Xiaoyun would not give her personal space to think too clearly. She felt insecure and inferior. Wasn't he the same? He was afraid that she would wake up and not want him anymore. Yu Xiaoyun could only use everything he had to fill her time and space. This was the only thing he wanted to do. Put aside the company, career, and power. If she liked it, he would plan to give it to her. If she didn't like him one day, he wouldn't care. Wei Wei Bai curled up and covered herself with the quilt. In the dark, the man behind her had already hugged her tightly. She shook her body and reached out to cover the bandage on the side of her face. Her voice was somewhat choked as she said, "I'm very ugly." Even after so long, he still couldn't let go. Yu Xiaoyun was silent for a moment and gently held her hand so that she couldn't touch the bandage. "Don't worry, it'll get better." Wei Weibai said, "You don't have to be so good to me. It's true that I betrayed you and wanted you dead." Yu Xiaoyun was silent for a while before sighing softly. "Yes, I know." After saying this, the corners of his mouth had already curled up. "So be good to me in the future. Otherwise, you'll let me down even more." Wei Weibai seemed to be choked by his words and her mind was stuck for a moment. Finally, she said, "What if I betray you one day in the future?" Yu Xiaoyun asked casually, "What kind of betrayal?" Wei Weibai probed, "For example, taking off your clothes, whipping you, or something like that." Yu Xiaoyun fell silent. Wei Weibai thought that there was no hope. However, she felt that the man behind her had already carefully gotten up and turned on the light. She didn't know where he got the small whip that she hid under the bed. Under the light, a lazy and strange smile appeared on the man's calm and elegant face. There was actually a beautiful and charming feeling. "What do you mean by whipping? How do you do it? Do you need me to take off my clothes?" Wei Weibai, her target was too proactive, and she was a little unable to control herself. /save button. Chapter 27-23. Under the dim bedside lamp, the man leaned against the bed. There were beautiful wooden buttons on his black silk pajamas. His slender fingertips had a strange sense of beauty under the dim light. Those beautiful fingertips had already reached the buttons and were unbuttoning them one by one. The skin under the man's beautiful white neck was exposed little by little. His skin color was as smooth as jade, and his chest below his collarbone was as beautiful as a work of art. Wei Weibai took the small whip that Yu Xiaoyun had given her and sat under the blanket. There was a trace of surprise in her eyes. Her eyes trembled slightly and swept across his neck. She found that the man's Adam's apple was moving. A blush swept across her face and reached her ears. Her eyes were red and delicate, and her fingers were holding the prop whip. It was more like a kind of pitiful temptation. Yu Xiaoyun's breath stopped for a long time. When he finally recovered his breath, he sat up. "I won't scare you anymore," he whispered, but his voice was unusually hoarse and sexy. It was obviously polite and elegant words. But for some reason, there was a trace of insincerity in them. Wei Weibai's eyes relaxed, and she was about to put down the whip. Yu Xiaoyun had already leaned forward, and his clothes were all scattered, revealing his strong upper body. Even the lines of his abdominal muscles could be seen. Her hand trembled, and the tail of the whip swept across his body. A faint red mark appeared on his body. Yu Xiaoyun's skin was fairer than ordinary people. Even if it was so faint that it was almost invisible, it was unusually clear on his skin. Wei Weibai's voice trembled. I didn't do it on purpose." After saying that, she was about to throw the whip away. Yu Xiaoyun smiled, stretched out his long arm, and held her wrist. The man's strong breath and the fragrance of his bath were like a kind of demonic poison, eroding this quiet space with an irresistible posture. His pair of affectionate eyes were burning with desire at this moment, and his breathing was unusually heavy. Wei Weibai stared at him blankly. The man smiled and slowly lowered his head. His thin lips were flirtatious and gently attached to the whip. His pair of gentle and beautiful eyes gently lifted. "It's okay. I like your intention." The man's words were like a demon in the dark night, full of evil and irresistible bewitchment. "So, you can be more intentional." Just as he finished speaking, he saw the young girl in his arms, and he was stunned. She wanted to pull back the whip, but she also wanted to dodge. She turned her body and tried to get off the bed. He was like a shy deer that was about to escape and had a bad feeling in advance. Yu Xiaoyun sighed faintly. He felt that he was simply too crazy. He really couldn't control himself when it came to her. She was still young. Yu Xiaoyun was still trying to convince himself. But as soon as the girl got off the bed, the man instinctively grabbed her whip and pulled her back with the whip. Yu Xiaoyun hugged her and whispered, "It's okay. Sleep well. I won't hurt you." Wei Wei Bai paused and thought that it was true. Yu Xiaoyun said, "Of course, you can whip me again." Wei Wei Bai, so she tried and whipped him. After all, the mission still had to be completed. Then, she confirmed one thing again. If a man's words could be trusted, Tong Zi could fix the reject button for the side mission. This night was too long. In the end, Wei Wei Bai only wanted to use the whip to tire this man who had never seen a woman in 8 lifetimes. Chapter 27-24. The system, the side quest, there was nothing wrong with them showing their faces. It meant that they were locked in the little black room again. It was just a whip, why did they have to be locked in the little black room? The system and the side quest seemed to know something. But they could not say. Since they had nothing to do, the system asked the side quest, "Why are you so free? The side quest is so difficult, do you want to go to heaven? Don't think that I won't hit you just because you're a spirit. Other people's side quests are so easy, why is it so difficult for my host? Did I step on your grave in my past life and use your ashes for rice?" The side quest looked at the limited edition golden truffle chocolate in the system's hand. It used the system's ashes to cook and eat his in its past life, so he stole the food in its fridge in this life. He had never seen such a shameless system. But then he thought about his host. The side quest was relieved. The two of them were of the same character. As expected of the pair of hosts who had the worst morals, the lowest bottom line, the least moral character, and the one whose conscience could poison a dog to death. The side quest said, because other people would reject the side quest, but you didn't reject it from beginning to end. The side quest will be upgraded automatically. If you reject it once, it will automatically return to the level 1 easy mode. Even if you don't reject it next time, it will still be a simple mission. The system said, "We never meant to reject." The side quest said, "This means that the difficulty of the side quest will automatically increase. If you keep accepting the side quest, the difficulty will always increase. This is the main system setting and can't be changed." The system, the side quest was angry, "I'm troubled too. The side quest has always been automatically assigned because simple missions don't need too many procedures to start." The system, the side quest said, "I've never seen an idiot who keeps accepting side quests. Isn't this looking for death?" The system that was looking for death, the side quest asked coldly, "Hee, why didn't you reject it? You made me unable to automatically assign it and could only monitor the completion of the side quest." The system could not say that he could not reject it, that would be embarrassing. So he calmly replied, "Oh, it's hard, hee." The side quest was even angrier, "Are you crazy? Can't you reject it and let the side quest automatically return to level 1 difficulty? Do you know that the difficulty of your quest has increased to level 100? The system was expressionless. "Oh, hee, awesome. Side quest, now that the difficulty level is so high, I can't even rest. Every time there's a level 100 side quest, I have to pay full attention to it, in case the device suddenly breaks down." The system pursed its lips. "Good luck." The side quest asked again, "Why didn't you reject the mission?" The system was silent for a moment before it began to chew on the chocolate. Why didn't he refuse? Because his equipment was broken. What other reason could there be? Could he say it? If he did, he would lose face. Therefore, he could only cry and act tough. That's because being invincible is so boring. That's why the side quests are our tonic. Side quest, this pair of hosts is really sick. He was actually courting death in such a cool manner. The branch was deeply shaken. The system turned around gracefully, as if nothing had happened. Tong Zi silently nibbled on the chocolate. In a place where no one knew, she silently looked up at the sky. If the host knew the reason why the side quests had become difficult, she would beat him to death. /quick. Chapter 27-25. It definitely would. Therefore, it was better to pretend that it didn't know about this matter. Let the host continue to misunderstand the side quest and jump to the side quest's grave disco bar. The side quest felt a little cold, but it didn't know who was cursing it. The sun, which was close to noon, made the person lying on the bed move under the blanket. A hand gently reached out from under the blanket. Countless ambiguous marks could be seen on the inside of her wrist. The man, who had heard the commotion, had already turned sideways. He reached out and was tying his tie. His suit jacket was casually draped on the back of the chair. He stood beside the mirror, wearing a light-colored shirt and black suit pants. The perfect clothes had a perfect slimming effect, making the curve of his waist show a beautiful outline. Yu Xiaoyun's eyes were gentle and affectionate. In the past, his deep feelings always had an ethereal immortal aura. He was like a person who didn't eat the food of the mortal world. He looked beautiful and exquisite, but he was like an artistic decoration, without any sense of reality. People often looked at him and felt that young Master Yu was too cold and aloof. They couldn't get close to him. He also seemed out of place in this world. They were afraid that he would one day become a wild crane. But now, Yu Xiaoyun finally showed the strength and maturity of a man. The gentleness in his eyes also contained a burning desire. He casually loosened the tie that was half done and let the tie fall loosely on his chest. Then, he walked to the bedside barefooted. The girl under the blanket seemed to have sensed something. She trembled and was about to escape. But before she could do anything, the man had already stretched out his strong arm, picked her up with the blanket, and pressed her into his arms. It was like hugging a doll that couldn't resist. Yu Xiaoyun reached out and took away the blanket covering her head, letting the blanket fall on her shoulders. The girl's shoulders were thin, but they were round and beautiful. There were traces of him on them. Yu Xiaoyun's eyes were extremely dark. He touched her face and felt the temperature of her trembling skin. At this moment, Yu Xiaoyun no longer had a trace of elegant immortal aura. There was only a mature man with a greed and uncontrollable passion for his woman. He lowered his head and kissed the bandage on her face. His breath blew on the girl's face, giving her no chance to protest. The way he hugged her was too familiar and natural. She didn't even have the strength to resist. After kissing her, Yu Xiaoyun said, "I'll go to the company for a meeting today to help you deal with the backlog of work. Then, I'll arrange for a doctor to come and take a look at you." Wei Bai lowered her eyes. The corners of her eyes were red and watery. She pursed her lips and remained silent. Yu Xiaoyun knew that she was angry. He had gone overboard last night, and in the end, he had nothing to lose. He could no longer suppress his thoughts, so he might as well force it a little. It was almost half coaxing before it was done. After she was injured, her mind was fragile. Midnight was the time when her heart was at its softest and most helpless. Her pitiful appearance should be the last moment of consolation. But he used it for something else. No wonder she was so angry when she woke up. Wei Wei Bai's big eyes were like grapes soaked in water, exceptionally clear and beautiful. She seemed to want to condemn him. However, she saw that the man was stubborn and thick-skinned. In the end, she lowered her head helplessly and sighed. Yu Xiaoyun stared at her helpless expression that was pretending to be mature and couldn't help but smile. Wei Wei Bai changed the topic in a low voice. Didn't I say that I would return the thing to you? When Yu Xiaoyun saw the side of her face, the tip of her small ear peeked out from her thick hair. He leaned over and said softly, almost touching the tip of her ear, "You don't have to return it. If you want, I can put it in a gift box and walk over myself so that you can open it." Chapter 27-26. Wei Wei Bai felt itchy in her ears. She couldn't help but mutter, "You sent yourself to me, and you still don't know who took advantage of you." If he sent himself to her, wouldn't she have to do the same? Yu Xiaoyun only felt that his heart had melted into a ball, and there was no sharp and hard thing in his heart. He nodded without principle. "Yes, I took advantage of you, it's all my fault. Why don't I go buy a durian and kneel down?" "Wei Wei Bai, you're addicted to self-abuse, aren't you?" She thought of the whip that was broken into pieces last night. Then she thought of the red marks on his back. Wei Wei Bai felt that she couldn't think about it anymore, or else her brain would be blocked. Yu Xiaoyun affectionately kissed her for a while, and finally left in a sticky manner. Lunch was prepared on the table. The new clothes were folded and put aside. Her body was dry, and the bedding was from early in the morning. It was changed. She was not alarmed. This meant that Yu Xiaoyun's movements were unusually careful. Love Garden was cleaned up, and all kinds of flowers were revealed. There was a beautiful scenery outside the window. Wei Wei Bai calmly put on her clothes, calmly rolled up her slightly long sleeves, and calmly looked at the marks on her skin. She was used to drinking. She sat at the dining table calmly and ate expressionlessly. The system was finally not released. He glanced at the favorability, and the male lead's favorability was actually 98. The charm of the whip last night was too great. The system cleared its throat and asked cautiously, "Why, are you still angry?" Wei Wei Bai stared at the bowl faintly. "No, I'm not angry." System, the host was still angry. Although she was still dedicated to the strategy, and dedicated to sticking to the first position of the strategy. But as her system, of course he knew. When the host woke up from the car accident. When she held the mirror and saw the wound on her face, that gloomy expression. At that moment, the system thought that she was going to stab Yu Xiaoyun to death with a knife. Then the host was in a bad mood. Even now, he could not forget it. He went to the supermarket to look for beautifying medicine, intending to heal her disfigurement. The host said gloomily, "No need, it's fine like this." The system replied, "Is it good?" The host smiled and touched his wound. A creepy smile appeared on his pale face. "The taste of disfigurement is not bad, hee. Damn, it felt like the surrounding temperature had dropped by 50 degrees. He was a polar bear that was going to freeze to death. Then, he heard the host say lightly, "It's getting cold, let Yu Xiaoyun die." The blow of disfigurement drove the host crazy. Wei Wei Bai finished her meal expressionlessly and said, "There are only a few days left before the Hainan Airlines project is completed. There was only one other mission left, which was for Yu Xiaoyun to praise her verbally." The system replied, "Yes, you can play after you're done." This time, the waiting time was a little longer. He couldn't go back after completing it. When Wei Wei Bai heard this, she revealed a gentle smile. "What are we playing?" The system replied, "Travel around the world or eat and drink." Wei Wei Bai said, "That's not fun." The system said, "How about, Wei Wei Bai touched the bandage on her face. How about we play with Yu Xiaoyun? After we're done with the mission, it must be exciting to jump off a building in front of him. The system said. Are you still angry? The blow of disfigurement was too big, causing the host to be mentally unstable. Wei Wei Bai smiled, a bright and sweet smile. Of course not. Which eye of yours saw that I was angry? I just thought that it would be fun to become a ghost after death and ride on Yu Xiaoyun's neck every day. The system was speechless. How is that fun? It's scary. Read the at https://www.sashu.com/the read the full article at https://www.sashu.com/ and read the full article at https://www.sashu.com and read the full article at https://m/sashu.com the comma. Chapter 27. After the meeting, Yu Xiaoyun sat in the conference room and talked to the doctors from M country about the surgery. This was the most authoritative aesthetic surgery institution. After he finished talking, he turned off the video. Beside him, Chen Shan was working hard to organize the information. Is the Hainan Airlines project going to start? It had been stopped for more than 2 months. If it stopped again, it would probably fail. Even if it started again now, it would lose more than 30% of the benefits. On a huge project, 30% of the benefits was very objective. The project had reached this point, no matter how it was done, it would be a loss. However, Chen Shan knew that Yu Xiaoyun had his own plans. Even if the project was a loss, it had to be done because this project was to lay the foundation for the company's transformation. It could only be restarted earlier to reduce the losses. Yu Xiaoyun crossed his hands gently, and there was a gentle light in his dark eyes. He slowly smoothed his cuffs. There was an exceptionally clear bite mark on his wrist. Last night, he was too anxious. She bit him when she was in pain. Yu Xiaoyun touched the bite mark with his fingertips and said gently, I'll go home and ask Wei Wei. Chen Shan stopped organizing the information and looked desperate. Are we really working for her? All the industries were transferred to Wei Wei Bai. Now, they were not the only ones working. Yu Xiaoyun was also working. The despair came too violently. It was hard to accept for a moment. The boss had become a bootlicker. She had licked until she had nothing. Yu Xiaoyun looked up and looked at Chen Shan indifferently. After a long time, Chen Shan finally lowered his head. He was extremely aggrieved. All right, let her be the boss. I have no objections. If he dared to have any objections, Yu Xiaoyun could freeze him to death with his gaze. Yu Xiaoyun slowly got up and said, deal with the participants of the Hainan Airlines project. Some people think that I'm dead. These words were so cold that people couldn't help but feel numb on their backs. When Yu Xiaoyun returned, he saw that the big house was brightly lit. He walked in and saw that the butler and servants were all there. The butler came up and took his clothes for him. He bowed his head and said respectfully, Mr. Yu. Yu Xiaoyun's expression was still calm. Miss is willing to let you come back. He had once instructed the servants who were chased away to rest assured and receive their salaries as if they were on vacation. If Wei Wei Bai told them to come back one day, only then would they be able to return. After all, he was used to using the servants and butlers that he had personally selected. It was not easy to find a group of outstanding servants with the same habits. He was afraid that she would find it inconvenient in the future, but he couldn't take care of her. If she needed a servant, she couldn't find one. So he decided to keep it for her. He just didn't expect that she would call him back so early. It seemed that his mood had improved. The butler nodded. Miss has already eaten, but she doesn't seem to have a good appetite. Yu Xiaoyun couldn't help but smile. The man's eyes were filled with gentleness and affection. She likes what I make. When he was learning how to cook, she was the only one who tasted his food. Wei Wei Bai was very picky. He had also spent a lot of effort to nourish her body and stomach. It was also for the sake of letting everything about him invade her life and become an indispensable habit for her. Habits are hard to change. For example, once loving her became a habit, it was unlikely that he could change it for the rest of his life. Yu Xiaoyun rolled up the cuffs of his shirt. The teeth marks were already a little red and swollen. When the butler saw it, his eyebrows moved. Yu Xiaoyun said, "It's okay. I'm happy to see it." Not only was he happy, but he also felt. The download the to read on your phone. Comma. Chapter 27-28. The man's eyes darkened, and there was a hint of bewitchment in them. Then he smiled as if nothing had happened. In the future, there may be more wounds like this. You'll get used to it. The butler's face turned red and he immediately left. Yu Xiaoyun went to the kitchen and made a bowl of Wei Wei Bai's favorite porridge. He also personally chose the ingredients to make a few fresh side dishes. Serve it for supper around 10 o'clock. He instructed in a low voice and then slowly wiped his wet fingers with a dry cloth. The man standing in the kitchen was extremely elegant. He threw the towel away, and the kitchen was extremely quiet. Everyone waited until he walked out before they dared to speak. In the future, all standards in the kitchen will be set by Mississippi, the kitchen butler instructed after Yu Xiaoyun left. Everyone nodded immediately. Yu Xiaoyun walked into the room and saw Wei Wei Bai squinting at the window casually looking at the moon. She was wearing a loose robe. Her pants were too long. She rolled up her pants, revealing her delicate and beautiful ankles and round toes. Her black hair was wet and scattered. Yu Xiaoyun walked over, reached for a clean towel, and quietly walked behind her. The man slowly bent down, gently picked up some of her black hair with his fingers, and gently wiped it with the towel. Wei Wei Bai seemed to have just realized that there was someone behind her, and she turned around. She saw Yu Xiaoyun lowering his head and wiping her hair. The man's eyelashes were very long, and his eyes were very deep, but it made the gentle curve at the corners of his eyes even more beautiful. His voice was hoarse. "How can you stand by the window after washing your hair? You'll get a headache." She had to take care of herself. Yu Xiaoyun's heart ached for her weak body. Back then, she was born with a difficult birth, and her body was weak to begin with. Not to mention the days she had spent in the Bai family all these years. Although she ate and drank a lot, she did not receive any good treatment. Bai Yanlan scolded and hit her as and when she wanted. Therefore, he could understand her pain. She could not struggle and wanted to take away the power in his hands. After all, to her, the people who had been abusing and humiliating her were all because they held power in their hands. Was that why they could treat her like this? Therefore, Yu Xiaoyun was very tolerant of her idea of seizing power. Bai Weiwei lowered her eyes and faintly looked outside. "I just feel that the outside is pretty good." Yu Xiaoyun's fingers paused and his gaze fell on her neck. There was a mark he had left behind. Because a day and a night had passed. The mark became even more obvious. The faint red color tempted his mind. He pursed his lips and did not say anything. This silence was a sign of a guilty conscience. Using the excuse of recuperating or other inconspicuous reasons, he restricted her freedom. Prevent her from leaving the house. He was afraid that she would go out. Yu Xiaoyun bit her lip, and a rare trace of embarrassment appeared on her face. The self-loathing in his heart was still there. That was why he was so resistant to her idea of going out. How nice would it be if she could just stay in the house that he built forever? This way, she would be able to meet anyone and encounter anything. He knew everything. Wei Bai was still young, and there was almost a gap in their ages. Now, looking at their appearances, they knew that there was a difference in age. But it was not obvious yet. What about in the future? What if he slowly grew old while she was still young? Or what if she loved him and went back on her word? Yu Xiaoyun suppressed too many worries and did not show the slightest dissatisfaction or melancholy. Instead, Yu Xiaoyun revealed a gentle smile and gently wiped her wet hair. There's a banquet meeting in a week's time on the cruise ship. Come with me. It's good to relax. It's a banquet meeting. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.